Chapter 1263. Lu Yi had the experience of fighting against the aphids from the insect emperor realm. Naturally, he knew that the elite cultivators of the insect clan were very strong individually. They were not something that the large insects without much intelligence could compare with. In particular, they were born with a bony carapace, which provided extremely tough protection. But when they really fought, he realized that the strength of these insectoid cultivators was much weaker than the aphid cultivators. This allowed him to kill them much more smoothly than he had expected. Come to think of it, the insectoid emperor realm was a top-tier realm, and the aphids were definitely the best of the best among the insectoids. Compared to them, the insectoid cultivators from other realms were naturally inferior. In any case, things went smoothly. Lu Yi was still thinking about how to spread his blood sea without arousing the insectoids' suspicions, but the insectoids were afraid that he might not be able to do it, so he had no choice but to reluctantly demonstrate it. With this demonstration, several insectoid cultivators died one after another. In the midst of the battle, under the control of several insectoid cultivators, the insectoid guards were also constantly attacking the blood sea, searching for Lu Ye's whereabouts. Obviously, they wanted to put pressure on him, but it was useless. By the time the insectoid cultivators were killed, the insectoid guards had become headless flies. There were many of them, but it was only a matter of time before Lu Yi got rid of them. After an incense stick's worth of time, the chaos subsided and the blood sea receded. Lu Yi was the only one left standing in the vast core space of the insectoid hive. Even his avatars had been recalled. He casually cleaned up the battlefield and burned the insectoid corpses to the ground. Lu Yi silently floated down and sat cross-legged to recover. He had to worry about being ambushed when he was recovering outside, but he didn't have to worry about anything here. Anyone with a brain wouldn't run into an insectoid hive and cause trouble. The insectoids themselves probably didn't expect that someone would dare to come here alone and start a massacre. The main reason was that the insectoids and vampires had an agreement. Lu Ye's blood cloud was too confusing. Who would have known that it wasn't a vampire hiding inside, but a human with evil intentions? While Lu Yi was recuperating, the insectoid experts on the White Jade platform began to look solemn. Because they had chosen a different strategy from the vampires, the insectoid monsters' names remained on the pillar on the left. Because they hadn't gained anything, they naturally couldn't make it into the top 100. However, as long as their names were still there, it meant that they were still alive. The most important thing in the battle for the Divine Sea was to stay alive. As long as they could survive to the end, even if they didn't gain anything, they could still enjoy the fruits of victory. It had been 2 months since the Alpha Origin stage opened. During this period, not a single insectoid monster had died. However, just now several of them had suddenly died. How could the insectoid experts not be shocked? They couldn't figure out who had the ability to break into the insectoid hive and start a massacre. Soon they locked onto a name: 9 Realm Lu Yi. Although there was no way to know what exactly had happened in the Alpha Origin stage, it was a fact that Lu Yi's ranking soared again after the insectoid cultivators died. He had reached the top once again. The vampires had used this change to confirm that their cultivators had died at Lu Yi's hands. They even speculated that Lu Yi had some means to restrain the vampires. Otherwise, how could he kill vampires again and again? It was precisely by stepping on the bones of those vampires that Lu Yi could reach the top of the list and look down on all the heroes. His throne at the top was built with the lives and blood of the vampires. During this period of time, Lu Yi's ranking had already slipped. Gu Yulo of the Yellow Dragon Realm and Yu Ping of the Northern Nether Ghost Tribe had already overtaken him. However, just now, this guy had instantly surpassed the 2 in front of him and reached the top once again. The insectoid experts' expressions were very solemn. Originally, they felt a little sad when the vampires were wiped out. However, this didn't happen to them, so they didn't feel too deeply. It was only at this moment that the insectoid experts fully understood the feelings of the vampires. What the hell was this Lu Yi doing? It would be fine if he had means to restrain the vampires, but he couldn't possibly have means to restrain the insectoid race, right? Several insectoid cultivators had built an insectoid nest. It didn't make sense for him to single-handedly destroy it. This kind of thing shouldn't happen at the Divine Sea realm. Perhaps it was just a coincidence. Or perhaps some unexpected change had occurred in the Alpha Origin realm. However, one day later, this fluke in their hearts was shattered. This was because the names of several insectoid cultivators had disappeared from the left pillar of the Alpha Origin realm in an extremely short period of time. Up until now, there weren't many names left on the left pillar. Any trace of change would attract the attention of those who were observant. The disappearance of the names of the insectoid monsters yesterday had already attracted the attention of many experts. Who would have thought that it would appear again today? There was no doubt that it was Wuxia from the realm of the Nine Heavens who had done it. If it was someone else who had done it, there would have been a small jump in the ranking. However, looking at the list of the top 100, there was not much change in the ranking. There was only one explanation for this. The person who did it was ranked first, so there naturally wouldn't be any changes. The blood race's previous strategy was hated by the experts of the various domains. Therefore, after the blood race's evildoers were killed one after another, until the entire army was wiped out, countless experts of the various domains clapped their hands in joy and secretly gloated. Now that it was the turn of the insectoid race, they were naturally no exception. These two races were already notorious in the starry sky, so it was really gratifying to see them fall into such a situation. The masters from all over the world were becoming more and more curious about Wuxia from the Nine Heavens realm. They had thought that an 8th order Divine Sea realm cultivator wouldn't even be able to survive after breaking through to the Alpha Origin realm. And they were certain he wouldn't be able to live for long. However, after witnessing his actions, he had first annihilated the entire blood race army, and now, he had turned around and targeted the insect race. What kind of method was this? Another day passed, and the faces of the insect race masters were as black as the bottom of a pot. There was no other reason other than that a few more insectoid monsters had died. In other words, another insectoid nest had been destroyed. According to the insect race's strategy, there were only 4 insectoid nests in total. Now, 3 of them had been destroyed, and only 1 seedling was left. No one knew how long it could last. The group of insect race masters couldn't help showing looks of disappointment. They couldn't wait to kill their way into the Alpha Origin realm and see what was going on inside. Why were they being bullied by a puny 8th order Divine Sea cultivator despite having the geographical and numerical advantage? The mocking and gloating gazes from all directions made the insect race masters angry. But they couldn't vent their anger on such an occasion. They could only comfort themselves that at least they still had the blood race as their fellow sufferers. Moreover, compared to the blood race, they still had a single seedling left. In the Alpha Origin realm, Wuxia was still collecting herbs while searching for an insectoid nest. An insectoid nest wasn't difficult to find. The main body of the insectoid nest standing outside was the best guide. When the insect race cultivators built the insectoid nest here, they didn't think about hiding it perfectly. This was because they knew that as long as the average person wasn't crazy, they wouldn't rashly enter an insectoid nest even if they found one. Otherwise, they would only be besieged by the insect race guards and cultivators. 3 of the 4 insectoid nests had been dealt with. They all used the same method, disguising themselves as members of the blood race and sneaking into the insectoid nest. Then they would activate the blood sea and start a massacre. There was only 1 insectoid nest left, but he wasn't in a hurry. After all, it was just on the way while he was collecting herbs. Intense spirit energy fluctuations came from the front. It was obvious that there was a battle going on. Although there were fewer and fewer people alive, the range of activity was getting smaller and smaller. Therefore, the chances of encountering each other had increased significantly. Occasionally, he would encounter 2 parties in a fierce battle. However, under normal circumstances, Wuxia would just pass by and wouldn't interfere easily. Before entering the Alpha Origin stage, Yangqing had encouraged him to be competitive, and had even set a high goal for him. However, after such a long time, Wuxia felt that he had already gained enough, and should be able to obtain a pretty good ranking. Hence, He would not take the initiative to provoke others, unless they were the first to display malice towards him. However, this time, Lu Yi found that he really couldn't pass by because he felt a familiar aura from the location of the battle ahead. Just as he was feeling a little surprised, a stream of light rushed towards him. It seemed to be in a panic. A graceful and exquisite body was vaguely wrapped in the stream of light. Upon closer inspection, he saw a charming and enchanting face. Who else could it be but Yu Yarao of the Nine Mysteries world? What a coincidence! Lu Yi didn't expect to meet her here. This woman's current situation wasn't very good. Her aura was weak, and she seemed to have suffered serious injuries. Ding Yu and Zhao Yunlu, who were traveling with her, were nowhere to be seen. Following closely behind her were two other figures, and they were chasing after her relentlessly in an aggressive manner. When Lu Yi discovered her, she raised her head and also saw Lu Ye's figure. Slightly startled, she immediately turned around and rushed to the side. This action was obviously not to guard against Lu Yi blocking her way, but to deliberately avoid Lu Yi, so as not to bring trouble to him. Otherwise, if she had rushed directly towards Lu Yi, whether Lu Yi was willing or not, he would have been drawn into this dispute. Her good intentions were useless in the end. One of the two cultivators chasing her also turned around and continued to pursue Yu Yarao, while the other rushed straight towards Lu Yi while laughing. How come there's a piece of trash 8th order here? As he spoke, he was about to activate the power of the spirit artifact in front of him to get rid of this piece of trash that had suddenly appeared. However, before he could really make a move, the other party sent out an imperial artifact, and in the next moment, the figure in front of him suddenly disappeared. Vaguely, there was a sharp saber light, and the sound of a long saber being unsheathed. The next moment, a creepy voice sounded behind his ear. Who are you calling trash? End of this chapter. Chapter 1264. While escaping, she found the trace of Lu Yi. Yu Yarao also thought of asking him for help, but this idea only turned in her mind for a moment before she gave up. First of all, there was no deep friendship between her and Lu Yi. When she was in trouble, she was in no position to ask him for help. Second of all, even if she really put down her face to ask for help, it was unknown whether he was willing to help. Taking a step back, even if Lu Yi was really willing to help her, it was also a problem whether he could fight against these two pursuers. She knew that Lu Ye's strength was not weak. Before the treasure gourd matured, she had thought of winning him over. But from the Battle of the Divine Ocean until now, which one of them was still alive? Now that she was seriously injured, the role she could play was extremely limited. If she really insisted on involving Lu Yi in this dispute, it would only bring trouble to him. So after a simple consideration, she turned around and continued to escape. One of the two pursuers behind her went to deal with Lu Yi. Yu Yarao could feel it, and she couldn't help but feel a little apologetic. Although it wasn't her intention, she still implicated him. Just when she was considering whether to turn around and cooperate with Lu Yi and fight to the death, an extremely violent spiritual fluctuation suddenly erupted behind her, followed by a scream. Yu Yarao was shocked. She was too familiar with this kind of short scream. Generally, it was the sound of a cultivator who was about to die. Sure enough, along with the scream, there was obviously the sound of vitality being annihilated. Who was it? While fleeing in panic, Yu Yarao didn't even have time to look back, because once she looked back, the speed of her escape was bound to be delayed. But the movement behind her made her unable to restrain her curiosity. When she hurriedly turned her head to look back, she couldn't help but be stunned on the spot by what she saw. The pursuer behind her was fighting fiercely with someone at the moment. Their spiritual weapons collided, making clanging sounds and splashing sparks. The one who was fighting with this pursuer was Lu Yi from the Nine Heavens realm. However, the other pursuer who went to deal with Lu Yi before had disappeared. When Yu Yarao recalled the previous miserable shriek and the annihilation of life force, how could she not know the fate of that pursuer? She slowly stopped moving and stared blankly. Her eyes were quickly filled with disbelief, because she was shocked to discover that the seemingly intense battle was actually one-sided. Instead of saying that the two people in the fierce battle were entangled with each other, It was better to say that one side was suppressed by the other to the point of being unable to fight back. Wuxia had the absolute advantage. Wuxia's figure shifted and his long saber chopped down. The pursuers, who were also weapon cultivators, could only parry Wuxia's storm-like attacks. This fellow had been so arrogant and despotic when he was chasing after him with another person, but now, he was in such a sorry state. Yu Yarao couldn't help but be absent-minded. She had been participating in the Divine Sea competition for more than 2 months now. She had seen many battles between monstrous geniuses of various worlds, and she had even personally fought with others. But basically, in such a battle, even if one side had the upper hand, the difference wouldn't be too great. It was very difficult for one side to have an overwhelming advantage. This was especially true for those who were still alive at this point in time. They were the real elites among the elites, and none of them were easy to deal with. So, when she saw the situation on the battlefield clearly, she couldn't help but feel that it was unreal. This was purely a one-sided beating, as if an adult was dealing with a child. They were both armament cultivators, but the pursuer was far from Wuxia's in terms of strength, speed, spiritual power, and combat experience. All of these factors were the crux of the problem that put the pursuer in a disadvantageous position. This guy is so strong. Yu Yarao had always known that he wasn't weak, but she never expected him to be strong to this extent. Even Zhao Yinlu was inferior to him. If he had such strength at the 8th Order Divine Sea Realm, what would happen if he reached the 9th Order Divine Sea Realm? Yu Yarao didn't dare to imagine it. After following Zhao Yinlu for a while, she felt that she had seen what kind of strength a monster from a top-level world had. But it wasn't until now that she understood that what she saw wasn't accurate. In this world, there would always be a higher mountain. Her nervous mood relaxed a little, as she knew that this calamity was over. The breath she had been holding in her heart dissipated, and she could no longer hold on. Her vision turned dark as she fell straight down from the sky. Along with her, the body of the second pursuer fell. But unfortunately, Yu Yarao didn't see it. Before she landed on the ground, Wuxia had already flown over and wrapped her up with his spirit energy. Sweeping her with his divine sense, he found that this woman was seriously injured. He didn't know what she had encountered before, nor did he know where her 2 companions had gone. Looking at Yu Yarao, who had fallen into a coma, Wuxia frowned, feeling quite troubled. It wasn't appropriate to leave her alone. After all, she wasn't a stranger he hadn't interacted with. Whether it was in the fairy tree world or the good fortune vine, Yu Yarao had helped him a lot. This could be considered a favor, and since he had received a favor from her, he naturally had to find a way to repay it. In her current state, if he really left her alone, once she was discovered, she would definitely die without a burial place. Especially since this woman was extremely charming and enchanting. If she were to encounter someone with ill intentions, she would probably suffer torture worse than death. However, it was somewhat inconvenient to carry an unconscious person in the alpha origin stage. After some consideration, he could only bring her along for the time being and wait for her to wake up. Yu Yarao's injuries were much more serious than Wuxia had imagined. After being injured, she should have experienced several great battles that had damaged her vitality, making her recovery particularly slow. Wuxia didn't know anything about medical cultivation, so he naturally couldn't provide any good treatment. At most, he could only feed her a few healing pills. After sleeping for several days, Yu Yarao finally woke up. When she opened her eyes, she was clearly very confused, but she soon remembered everything that had happened before she fell unconscious. She quickly got up and vigilantly scanned her surroundings. Her spirit energy, which had yet to fully recover, was ready to be unleashed. Then, she saw Wuxia, who was sitting cross-legged not far away, looking like he was in a trance. Sensing movement, Wuxia turned his head and glanced at her. He nodded slightly, but didn't say anything, and continued to be in a trance. Seeing him like this, Yu Yarao's heart relaxed. She checked her own condition, and found that although her injuries were still serious, they were in the process of recovery. There was still the taste of healing pills in her mouth. Someone must have fed them to her after she fell unconscious. Her clothes were intact, and there were no signs that they had been undone. There was nothing abnormal about her body. She couldn't help but curse herself for measuring the heart of a gentleman with her own mean measure. However, as a woman, especially a beautiful woman like her, the first thing she should do after waking up from her coma was to examine herself. It was something that couldn't be blamed for. This movement made her feel weak from the inside out. Even her complexion became pale. She coughed softly and said, "Thank you, Junior Brother Lu. If Junior Brother hadn't saved me, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to survive. I am deeply grateful for your life-saving grace." Lu Yi waved his hand and said, "Senior Sister you are too serious. Junior Brother has also received Senior Sister's kindness. Let's just treat it as reciprocity." "It's not the same." Yu Yarao shook her head. She didn't have any kindness to Lu Yi. She had only answered some of his doubts, but Lu Yi had saved her life. At that time, if Lu Yi hadn't saved her, she wouldn't have survived. Moreover, Lu Yi didn't care about this, but she couldn't not care about it. This was a matter of principle. She had to remember the kindness in her heart. As for how to repay it, she wasn't sure. She couldn't repay him with her body here, otherwise, she would belittle herself and others. Yu Yarao wanted to say something more, but Lu Yi didn't want to be entangled in this matter. For him, it was really a piece of cake, and he also got 2 more benefits. "Where are your 2 companions?" asked Lu Yi. Yu Yarao's eyes dimmed slightly as she sighed. "Fellow Taoist Ding died in battle, and fellow Taoist Zhao is separated from me. I don't know where he is or if he's still alive." Even if their team of 3 wasn't weak, and even if Zhao Yunlu was a monster from a top domain, it was still difficult for them to advance in the Alpha Origin stage. The 3 of them had previously encountered another team, and the leader of that team just so happened to be from a domain that had a deep grudge with the Conquer Star. Therefore, a fierce battle naturally ensued. In the fierce battle, Ding Yu was killed, and she and Zhao Yunlu were separated. Later, they were chased to the point that they had nowhere to run, and then they encountered Lu Yi. This was actually a microcosm of the current Alpha Origin stage. At this stage, even the monsters from the top domains couldn't guarantee that they would have the last laugh. Now that she thought about it, Yu Yarao felt that it was a pity. Back then, she had tried to rope in Lu Yi on the fortune vine, but was obstructed by Zhao Yunlu. Now, it seemed that if they had roped in Lu Yi at that time, with the strength Lu Yi had displayed, their team of 4 would not have ended up in such a state, either dead or injured. However, Zhao Yunlu had his own considerations back then, and as a member of the same team, Yu Yarao naturally couldn't disobey him. There was no point in regretting it now. Their ending could only be attributed to their bad luck. After saying a few words, Yu Yarao gasped for breath, her body clearly extremely weak. Lu Yi asked, "Senior Sister, what do you plan to do next?" In his view, Yu Yarao's best choice was to leave the Alpha Origin stage. She needed some time to recover from her injuries, and during this process, it would be difficult for her to display her full strength. Currently, the range of activity in the Alpha Origin stage was getting smaller and smaller. Once she encountered an enemy, she would basically be at their mercy. The reward for victory was indeed pretty good, and was something that every Divine Sea stage cultivator yearned for. However, relatively speaking, one's life was the most important. Where there was life, there was hope. End of chapter. Chapter 1265. Moreover, even if one withdrew from the Alpha Origin stage, they would still have a chance to ascend to the Star Constellation stage. For these monsters from large domains, the path to ascending to the Star Constellation stage was always there, and opportunities were everywhere. They did not necessarily have to fight for the opportunity in the Alpha Origin stage. The battle for the Divine Sea had already been going on for more than 2 months. No one knew how many people had died during this period, but there were definitely those who withdrew of their own accord. Of course, these were only Lu Ye's own considerations. How Yu Yarao thought about it was his own business. Lu Yi knew that she wouldn't withdraw so easily. For the monstrous geniuses of the various worlds, the fact that they were still persisting in the battle of the Alpha Origin spirit, wasn't just for the chance to win. It was more of a way for them to hone themselves. Sure enough, Yu Yarao said, "I'll rest for a few days. Don't worry, junior brother Lu, I won't drag you down. I will leave once I recover. When she was with Zhao Yun and Lu Dingyu, she was willing to rope in Lu Yi. But the current situation wasn't suitable for her to act together with others. She didn't want to become a burden to him. She couldn't repay his life-saving grace for the time being, so how could she drag him down? Lu Yi remained silent. He wasn't worried that Yu Yaorao would drag him down. Instead, he was worried that he would drag her down. Yu Yaorao had been unconscious all this time, so she didn't know that the situation in the Alpha Origin stage had changed again. There were only 20 days left until the 3-month deadline, and the reincarnation tree's revelation had arrived an hour ago. Yang Qing had told him about this before, and Lu Yi had been waiting for this moment. He really wanted to know what ranking he would place himself in after such a long time. This would determine what he would do next. Although he had already expected it, Lu Yi still couldn't help but be surprised when the revelation arrived. This was because his name was in first place. 9 Heavens Realm, Lu Yi 208. Lu Yi wasn't surprised by this ranking. He knew that his ranking wouldn't be too low, and it wasn't impossible for him to be in first place. What surprised him was the number. 208 was undoubtedly the number of enemies he had killed recently. However, this number was obviously unreasonable, unless the insect tribe guards he killed when he was destroying the hive were also included. He had destroyed 3 insectoid lairs. Apart from killing the dozen or so insectoid cultivators hiding in them, he did not spare the insectoid guards either. Each insectoid lair had dozens of insectoid guards. If these insectoid guards were included, he might have killed more than 200 insectoid guards. From the looks of it, this was the only possibility. However, the insectoid guards were created by the insectoid cultivators in the insectoid nest, so they weren't considered candidates for the Battle of the Divine Ocean. Did killing them count? No one had ever told him about this matter. It was a game that no one had ever done such a thing. No one had ever served the Yuan as an example. Mosai 8 thinks that Een Ilian's 4 roses are not weak, and they are all gathered in the core of the caterpillar fruit. Secondly, there are insect race cultivators controlling the troops. Ordinary cultivators really can't take advantage of them. In that kind of environment, killing the treasure race's guards seems to be a great achievement. The rules of the battle for the Divine Sea were set by the reincarnation tree. It felt that it was reasonable. 1 yuan. No one would say anything. However, in this way, Lu Ye's achievement was somewhat impressive. Looking at the second-ranked Yellow Dragon Realm's Guyulo's achievement, it was only 53. The third-ranked Northern Dark Ghost Realms, Yuping only had 49. In comparison, the number 208 could be said to be far ahead, making it difficult for others to look up to him. Lu Yi didn't know that when the reincarnation tree's revelation arrived, at that time, the 11 roses who were still alive in the absolute beginning realm caused a huge uproar. But the number of kills each other, the disparity, had undoubtedly reached the point where all the monstrous geniuses who had the ambition to ascend to the top felt despair. The number 208 was destined to be an insurmountable mountain. There were only 20 names revealed in the revelation, which were the top 10 and the bottom 10. When the cultivators immersed themselves in investigating one of the names, they would immediately know the location of that person, and could also roughly judge the distance between themselves and that person. This kind of revelation was originally a change made by the reincarnation tree to prevent opportunistic people from using some special secret method to hide and reap without sowing. Lu Yi didn't know what effect this revelation would have on others, but it was definitely not good for him. Everyone go quickly and try. Not to mention the others, just the other top 10 cultivators. Which one of them was not from a top realm? All of them were famous throughout the starry sky. Only Lu Ye's 9 Heavens realm was unknown. So even if the number 208 was shocking enough, there were still people who could not help but want to test his strength. Therefore, once the reincarnation tree's revelation came out, whether Lu Yi was willing or not, he would immediately become the most popular tree. In addition, for the few cultivators who were ranked at the top, they naturally hoped to reach the top and obtain the greatest benefits. Originally, they could achieve the goal of overtaking the top by killing enemies and continuously accumulating the number of kills. But now, the gap between them was so big that the number of 208 was indeed a little too much. It was no longer something that could be easily surpassed. Thus, there was only one choice left for them: to kill the one ranked first. As long as they killed Lu Yi, not to mention 208 kills, even if they killed two, it would be meaningless. Therefore, Lu Yi could completely foresee that at this moment, there would definitely be many people investigating his position. Some people were even approaching his direction, and there would be more than one. He also thought about whether to change his position or not. The reincarnation tree's revelation didn't last forever. It would last for about an incense stick's worth of time before disappearing. After a while, a new revelation would descend, and this cycle would repeat. Therefore, if Lu Yi changed his position in time, there was still hope that he could avoid those people who came looking for trouble. But this kind of thing, even if he could avoid it this time, he couldn't avoid it next time. Therefore, after a simple consideration, Lu Yi simply stayed here. What should be done? The Battle of the Divine Sea would end in 20 days. It was good to have such an opportunity to sharpen himself at the last moment. While Lu Yi was thinking, Yu Yara was quietly recovering on the side, not disturbing each other. Until a certain moment, Yu Yara suddenly felt a violent surge of spiritual power, followed by the sound of a long sword being unsheathed. In an instant, the spiritual power surged like a gust of wind, blowing her clothes and making them flutter. When she quickly looked up, she was surprised to find that Lu Yi had already put away his sword, and was still sitting there quietly. But not far behind him, a short figure had appeared at some point. At this moment, this figure's eyes were wide open, and his hand was covering his neck as he staggered back. After retreating a few steps, he knelt on the ground with a plop and fell straight down. A large area of blood quickly soaked the ground, which was a shocking sight. Yu Yara was shocked. How could she not know that someone wanted to sneak attack Lu Yi, but was killed by him instead? What made her even more shocked was that before Lu Yi attacked, she didn't even notice that someone was approaching. Of course, this was related to her poor state at the moment, and her perception was slow, but it also showed that the other party's concealment methods were brilliant. This was undoubtedly a ghost cultivator with high attainments. Even though she had seen Lu Ye's killing methods once before, she couldn't help but feel a little unreal when she saw it again. When she accompanied Zhao Yunlu and the others, she had also made some gains. But every time she had to go through an extremely difficult battle to gradually turn her advantage into victory. Victory, and then accumulation into victory. But when it came to Lu Ye's side, how could he kill someone so easily? As simple as a chick. It should be said that the cultivators who had entered the Alpha Origin stage were the top Divine Sea experts of their respective domains. Even if ghost cultivators were not good at close combat, after their whereabouts were exposed, they shouldn't have been killed so easily. Yu Yarao found that she seemed to have underestimated junior brother Lu's means. But there was one thing she didn't understand. Why did this ghost cultivator want to sneak attack junior brother Lu? Logically speaking, wasn't it better to sneak attack her? Anyone with discerning eyes should be able to see that she wasn't in a good state at the moment, and was undoubtedly the best target for a sneak attack. She couldn't understand, but the other party was already dead, and there was no way to ask. The smell of blood filled the air, and Yu Yarao struggled to get up and walk towards the corpse. Lu Yi raised his head and glanced at her. "Senior sister Yu, what are you doing?" Yu Yarao gasped for breath as she explained. "I'm dealing with the corpse. Some people have very sensitive noses, and the smell of blood may attract their attention. No need to trouble senior sister. You can rest." Yu Yarao didn't insist and sat down quietly again. A moment later, she suddenly raised her head and looked in a certain direction with a solemn expression. "Junior brother Lu, it seems to be coming for us." Lu Yi nodded. "I see." In that direction, demonic chi soared into the sky, and demonic clouds surged over, connecting the sky and the earth. The momentum was extremely terrifying. The giant demonic clouds were less than 3 miles away from Lu Yi. They stopped where they were. An extremely tyrannical and barbaric aura filled the demonic clouds, and waves of beast roars sounded from within. The sound of wolves howling was followed by a huge head poking out of the demonic clouds. It looked like a wolf's head, and it looked ferocious and terrifying. The wolf's head looked down at Lu Yi from above. The wolf's eyes were overflowing with indifference and viciousness, causing people to be intimidated. Then the wolf's head opened its mouth and said in a thunderous voice, "You are Lu Yi from the Nine Heavens realm?" Lu Yi raised his head and squinted at the wolf's head, not saying a word. On the contrary, Yu Yaorao was slightly nervous, and she secretly transmitted her voice to Lu Yi. "Junior brother Lu, be careful. This should be the celestial wolf clan of the monster race. I'm afraid it was attracted by the smell of blood. Its demonic chi is strange, and has the effect of making people crazy. If junior brother wants to fight with it, you must not be contaminated by its demonic chi." Chapter 1266. As soon as Yu Yaorao's voice fell, the ground shook violently, and a shockwave rolled out. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Lu Ye's figure soar into the sky and crash straight into the huge monster cloud. Yu Yaorao was dumbfounded. She had clearly warned Lu Yi to be careful of the opponent's monster chi, but Lu Yi obviously didn't take it to heart. She didn't know whether to call him confident or arrogant. But soon, Yu Yaorao realized that this wasn't arrogance, because a fierce battle soon broke out inside the monster cloud. At first, the roars of the Tianlang race were full of energy and power, but in just 3 breaths, they turned into cries of surprise, and then screams of pain. A few breaths later, the huge demonic cloud dispersed, and a figure stood in midair, holding a saber in one hand and a huge wolf head in the other. The wolf head's eyes were wide open, and its eyes were filled with horror, as if it had died with everlasting regret. Drip, 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 blood flowed from the wound, and although the sound was soft, it struck Yu Yaorao's heart like a heavy hammer. Lu Yi flew back and casually threw the wolf head to the side with a calm expression, as if he had just gone out to pick a wild flower, and not a wolf head. Yu Yaorao's mind was shaken. No matter how many times she saw this, she still found it hard to adapt to such a straightforward and efficient way of killing the enemy. Originally, she still had a little bit of confidence in her own strength. When she was traveling together with Zhao Yunlu and Ding Yu, she had also repeatedly proved her strength. But it was only at this moment that she discovered that in front of a true monstrous genius, the so-called monstrous genius of this domain, like her, seemed to be no different from an ordinary divine sea realm expert. Zhao Yunlu came from a top-level realm, the Conqueror Star realm, and even among this group of geniuses who had entered the Alpha Origin realm, he was extremely strong. But compared with junior brother Lu in front of her, the gap was still not small. Yu Yaorao gradually realized a problem. This junior brother Lu, who was only an 8th order divine sea realm cultivator, might become the most dazzling star in the entire Alpha Origin realm. Anyone who underestimated him because of his cultivation would inevitably pay a heavy price. She had to speed up her recovery. Junior brother Lu didn't leave right now because he was taking care of her injuries, but she couldn't let him stay here forever. She had to recover as soon as possible and leave, lest she become a burden to him. As she thought about this, Yu Yaorao swallowed another precious healing pill, and started to refine it silently. However, she soon discovered that things seemed to have become a little troublesome, because less than 2 hours after Lu Yi killed the cultivator from the Heavenly Wolf clan, someone else came to the door. After a short and fierce confrontation, the newcomer was unsurprisingly cut down by junior martial brother Lu. After that, every once in a while, someone would rush over from different directions and fight with junior brother Lu. But no matter what race they were from, or what realm they came from, all of them were either dead or injured without exception. Those with fast reactions would be able to escape after exchanging a few blows, but those with slow reactions would have no chance of survival once the battle dragged on for more than 10 breaths. Next to the place where the 2 of them were resting, bloody corpses kept appearing one after another. In less than 2 days, there were already 7 or 8 corpses lying here. Yu Yaorao didn't know whether junior brother Lu did it intentionally or unintentionally. In any case, the corpses of the cultivators he killed were neatly placed on the side. Anyone who came here could see them clearly. This was undoubtedly a form of deterrence as well as a warning. After 2 days of recuperation, Yu Yaorao's injuries had recovered a lot. According to her original plan, it was time for her to leave Lu Yi and act alone. But the development of the situation in the past 2 days made it impossible for her to leave. Because in her perception, she could clearly perceive that there were auras lurking in all directions. In other words, the place where she and Lu Yi were located had been surrounded. It was just that the 7 or 8 corpses on the ground were powerful enough to deter and shock them. So for the time being, no one dared to act rashly, lest they followed in the footsteps of those people. Why was it like this? Yu Yara couldn't figure it out, but she knew that she must have overlooked something. Otherwise, it would be impossible for these monstrous cultivators, who were scattered all over the place, to gather here. Those people who were killed by Lu Yi before were all looking for him by name. Yu Yara soon realized what she had overlooked, because the second revelation of the reincarnation tree had arrived. A large piece of information appeared in her mind out of thin air, including the names of 20 people. These 20 names included the names of the top 10 and the last 10 people at the current stage. The one ranked first was Lu Yi from the 9 Heavens realm, and the number 216 behind his name made her dizzy. 216. Just looking at this number didn't mean anything, but it should be said that this number represented the harvest of a cultivator in the alpha origin stage. Every increase in this number represented the accumulation of blood of a monstrous genius from a particular realm. Up until now, Yu Yara had only obtained a mere 4. Compared to the 216 she had obtained, it was simply not even a fraction. How did he do it? Yu Yara stared blankly at Lu Yi. She really couldn't understand how such a taciturn young man, who didn't have any particularly overbearing imposing manner, could kill so many people. She finally understood why these people had come here. The revelation of the reincarnation tree must have already arrived once, and it was unreasonable to obtain more than 200 harvests. In addition, the 9 Heavens realm where junior brother Lu came from wasn't well known, so he would inevitably attract the attention of others. Those who were confident in their strength and wanted to use him as a stepping stone would naturally come looking for him. There were also those who were driven by curiosity and came to watch the show. As a result, this place naturally became the center of the gathering of cultivators. Junior brother Lu. Yu Yara couldn't help but call out softly. There were many things she wanted to ask, but she didn't know where to start. She couldn't really ask Lu Yi about the more than 200 harvests, right? Lu Yi could roughly guess what she was thinking, but he did not explain. Since the reincarnation tree had considered those insectoid guards as his spoils, then he deserved it. There was still one more insectoid nest. If the others were not convinced, they could go and try to get rid of it. Senior sister you'd better stay here. If it was before, Yu Yara would have left. Even if she hadn't recovered from her injuries, she still had some strength, so she wouldn't be powerless in the face of danger. But in the current situation, it was no longer suitable for her to leave. Now there were many cultivators hiding in all directions, and they all saw that Yu Yara was with him. If Yu Yara really left at this time, she would be targeted easily. In her current state, she couldn't resist too many attacks. Lu Yi could roughly guess the mentality of the cultivators hiding in all directions. Perhaps not all of them had come to find trouble with him. Perhaps many of them had come to watch the fun. After all, his harvest was too amazing, and he was afraid that everyone would want to see whether he had 3 heads and 6 arms. However, just because they were here to watch the show, it did not mean that they would not add insult to injury. Now that the situation was temporarily stable, they had learned a lesson from the previous incident. The 7 or 8 bloody corpses on the ground were undoubtedly a great visual impact and deterrence. Anyone who wanted to find trouble with them would have to consider whether they were stronger than the dead ones. The current situation could be considered to have maintained a strange balance. Those who wanted to test their strength didn't dare to act rashly, while those who were watching the fun were waiting for others to make trouble. Therefore, the overall situation could be considered to be calm. However, this peace was bound to be broken. Lu Yi did not believe that he would be able to peacefully wait until the end of the Alpha Origin stage. Without mentioning the others, among the top few ranked monsters, there was bound to be someone who desired to take first place. These monsters were true experts, and if they wanted to take first place, they would have to pull Lu Yi down. Lu Yi was waiting for a true opponent with enough strength. Only then could he solve the problem once and for all. Otherwise, the people hiding in the surroundings with ulterior motives wouldn't easily disperse. While waiting, the ground suddenly trembled. The initial tremors weren't obvious, but as time passed, the tremors grew clearer and clearer, as if a behemoth was approaching step by step. Lu Yi raised his eyes and looked in the direction of the sound. Sure enough, he saw a burly figure unhurriedly rushing over. The burly figure was somewhat abnormal. Even if Lu Yi was wearing the dragon throne, he might not be as tall as him. The newcomer's upper body was bare, and his lower body was only bound by a simple animal skin. His skin glowed with a bronze luster, and his flesh was clearly defined. At first glance, he didn't seem fleshy, but instead looked like he was piled up from stone. His body seemed extremely heavy, and every step he took left a deep imprint on the ground, causing the ground to tremble. Yu Yarao's voice sounded in his ears, and it seemed a little dignified. It's the Stone Tribe, it should be Baosher. Lu Yi nodded slightly, recognizing the newcomer's identity. They hadn't met before, but in the revelation of the reincarnation tree, Baosher from the 5-color domain was ranked 7th. Lu Yi didn't know whether the 5-color domain was a top-level domain, but to be able to rank 7th in this battle of the Spirit Sea, Baosher wasn't comparable to the cultivators he had met before. In fact, Lu Yi did feel some pressure from the other party's momentum. Lu Yi realized that he seemed to have made a mistake. He thought that the most likely to come looking for him was either Gu Yulo from the Yellow Dragon Realm, or Yu Ping from the Northern Nether Ghost Tribe. If these two had the intention of becoming number 1, they would have to find a way to kill him. As for the others, even if they came to find trouble with him, it wouldn't make much sense, because even if they were lucky enough to kill him, their ranking would only rise by 1, and there would be no substantial benefits. He had been waiting for the 2 people ranked behind him, but instead of these 2, Baosher, who was ranked 7th, came. End of chapter. Chapter 1267. Lu Yi suddenly understood. To these top-notch monsters, this was that there weren't many opportunities to fight with other top-notch monsters. If they missed this opportunity, there would be no next time. The revelation of the reincarnation tree hadn't arrived yet. Before, they couldn't accurately find each other's location, but after the reincarnation, after the revelation of the tree descended, they could follow the traces of the revelation to investigate. In this way, the top-notch monsters would have a chance to fight. Yes, they might not necessarily aim to kill each other. It was very likely that they would only want to fight and see the gap between them and the others. Heavens! In this way, he, the top of the leaderboard with astonishing results, would become the best touchstone and the most suitable target. The other rankings. No matter what the true strength of the fellow at the front was, his powerful domain. His background was there, and he wasn't so easy to provoke. Boulder should have come here with this thought, so he didn't have the slightest intention of hiding his whereabouts. He walked over. Of course, it might also be because he wasn't good at concealment. He wasn't the first, and he definitely wouldn't be the last. Under Yu Yarao's nervous gaze, Lu Yi slowly stood up. He placed his saber in front of him, his hands folded on the hilt, and waited quietly. The earth was still gently shaking with the fall of his footsteps. The atmosphere in the Qi became austere, and one could clearly feel that the surroundings were. The dormant aura began to withdraw. To the cultivators hiding in the surroundings, such a situation was also what they were looking forward to. They gathered for various reasons. Apart from a few people who had seen spirit energy kill enemies with their own eyes. Duan. The others simply didn't know about the temporary ranking from the Four Heavens realm. The leader didn't have any foundation. Even those who had seen spirit energy kill enemies. In fact, it was hard to see clearly, because the speed at which spirit energy killed enemies was too fast. Slow, so slow that almost every time, it was a complete crushing. It was difficult to give rise to a tense posture of killing an intruder. It was an illusion that you could do it. Spirit energy is waiting for an opponent with no weight, and so are we. Waiting. The light that was slowly rushing back turned into a halo of light in the collision, revealing two figures. The tall and sturdy one waved his fist. The short and sturdy one wielded his saber, colliding. This was a sound, but it was followed by Lu Ye's violent surge, and a loud noise that shook the heavens. Two rays of light of the same color were the eruption of their respective Lu Yi. It was clear that a breath ago, they had suddenly collided. The saber light gradually disappeared, but very slowly, it lit up again. The crescent moon-like slashes came from all directions, none of them capable of destroying gold. The ability to break jade. Because in the domain of power, the stone tribe has never been able to reach the heavens. Their unique advantage was that they were inferior to any other race in the universe. The crescent moon had just begun, but there was already a small dazzling sun rising. The dim light made all the cultivators who were watching the battle in the dark almost open their eyes. There was a loud sound of two palms clapping together. It was especially earth-shattering, causing people's eardrums to hurt. Without any further movement, the man holding the boulder clenched his fists and fiercely threw them towards the ground. Smashing upwards, the instantaneous change of moves was swift and smooth. There were no tricks to speak of. In a trance, Bowser seemed to see the spiritual power rising in front of him. The sky was filled with stars. In the previous instant, as the saber pierced forward, the sky was filled with stars. Chi Chao fell down on me like a violent storm trying to drown me. Yes. On the other hand, Bowser was still indifferent, but he didn't suffer any injuries. Instead, the traces of injury were stimulated, almost at the moment when the saber lotus bloomed. In an instant, he roared and pounced towards the spirit force. Overbearing first move stars. But in the last moment, the spirit force will tell us how to deal with the situation. In response to such a crisis, facing the knee of Bowser's head, instead, he borrowed the force of his feet to step on the ground. At the same time, the long saber in his hand danced. He moved and collided with the other party's fists. Bowser shook his head and doubted his performance just now. He was very satisfied. When he raised his eyes, he saw the figure of the spirit force in the sky like an azure sky. The eagle pounced on him, his body surging with leaves, and his saber momentum advancing. The change in that scene caused everyone to gasp in amazement. The reaction of the emergency was something that everyone had. And more importantly, they had to have absolute confidence in their own strength. Otherwise, one would be bad. The outcome of dying on the spot. With a loud bang, the place where Bowser was originally, a small pit had already appeared, and his burly figure almost turned into a ray of light. Gray light. Sparks flew in all directions, and the figure of the spirit force soared into the sky. He was able to create a path of survival amidst such killing intent. In an instant, the confrontation was so dangerous that no one who watched it in the dark. The cultivators in the battle were all sweating profusely. We had all experienced it before. There were many life and death battles. But looking at what he had experienced, and behind the eyes, what he saw seemed to be on a completely different level. That was obviously my intention. I deliberately misled others with my actions. So that when I really attacked, I couldn't hit one of them. It was too late. I couldn't foresee that some people would be hit by Bowser's fist, and then they would be hit by my knee. Waiting for the spirit force would be no bad thing. The fruit. That guy's every strike was small and heavy to the extreme. If he wasn't dead, he would be injured. When I saw Bowser's size and characteristics, I realized that that guy's strength might be very weak, but he only released it before the real confrontation. Now, the other party's strength was completely beyond his expectations. However, the crescent moon-like slash only left a mark under Bowser's body. A tiny bit was enough to leave a mark on the Tao. It could damage it in the slightest. Looking at this tall and sturdy figure, almost everyone could feel it. Deep despair. The monster-like physique of the Stone Clan was really too easy to understand. From this, it could be seen that Bowser wasn't ranked first because of my strength. He was ranked first but because I had more kills than the others. That was why he was ranked first. If he really pulled down all the people in the bottom 10, come out and do the next battle with real swords and spears, my ranking would still be good. Even lower. Bowser's arrival couldn't be said to be a bad thing. But it was also what everyone expected. Returning to first place in first place, there was bound to be no surprise between the two. An earth-shattering collision, whether it was good or bad. I couldn't use this opportunity to observe 17. In the end, people didn't have much of a foundation or means. In the Alpha Origin realm, I killed many so-called monsters from various realms. Among them were races known for their strength. But these were races known for their strength. Behind me, the races known for their strength were simply as big as behind a small person. There was a difference between children, and as long as I was careful, I couldn't crush them. That was also the pure incompetence that I had encountered for a long time. In terms of strength, I completely defeated my opponent. The first collision was made by Li. The situation immediately became very good. Facing the opponent's combined palm attack, he could only take advantage of the current to sink, narrowly avoiding the attack. Yes, but even so, one of Bowser's knees was suddenly raised. It came straight at the top of the spirit force, as fast as lightning. That made me very surprised. I sighed that the human race was indeed a magical race. The race clearly didn't have any special abilities, but it was always able to make people look at it. The latter's ability. I looked at the spirit force standing outside with a saber, and raised my fan-like hand. My small hand touched my bare head, and opened my mouth in a muffled voice. 4 days, Wuxia? That made many people curse in their hearts. That thick eyebrows and small eyes looked like the simple and honest Stone Clan was also a bad thing. The burly and low figure was only 8,000 feet away from the spirit force. He stopped and looked closer. This figure brought about a sense of oppression. The suspicion was even weaker. Bowser's face looked very simple and honest. There was hair on the top of his head, and his entire head was like a round stone ball. 7 organs were born under the stone ball, and he had thick eyebrows and small eyes. Jiao Lu was not this fly to be swatted. Each of them changed their position, and thought about how to deal with such a killing move. Only then could they resolve it. But in the end, there was a bad way. Bowser grinned, and raised his little thumb to his nose. Brother, you are Bowser. Bowser of the 7-color domain. Today's battle is related to personal grudges. It's purely a pleasure to see a hunter, so please do your best. Go, if so, you might kill him. Speaking of the first one, my smile widened, and my mouth twisted into a ferocious grin. Come. When the small sun exploded, it was like a blooming lotus flower, and each petal was a row of saber lights. In the center of the lotus flower was the spirit force, the figure holding the saber. The spirit force's figure flipped forward, and Bowser's figure also slightly fell forward. He staggered forward, and a stunned expression appeared on his simple and honest face. Love, because I had thought that such a big person would be able to burst out with such a weak power. The 8th move of the tyrant saber, Lotus Sun. On the other side, a fiery red light greeted him. Who is it? I also saw how Wuxia moved, but I didn't secretly close my eyes. Yu Yaorao, who was paying attention to me, could clearly see that when Bowser didn't move, at that time, Jiao Lu also moved. It was almost a hair's breadth away. It could be seen that the spirit force was not affected by the other party's original actions at all. Guide, I had been wholeheartedly guarding against the other party's attack. When that shocking scene was imprinted in their eyes, the spectators finally understood. He understood what it meant to be ranked number 1. Everything else aside, just that alone. 8 saber moves. Some of the cultivators present didn't have the confidence to block them. If any of us ended up like this, we would definitely not be in danger at this moment. Many. Just now, I walked over in such a hurry step by step. Anyone who saw it would subconsciously feel that that guy's body was light and his movements were light. But, when I really moved, the cultivators who were secretly paying attention were shocked. They realized that everything just now was just my disguise. That guy's body was, perhaps it was really light, but the speed at which he ran was not the slightest bit inferior to will be inferior to other people. When the saber light broke through the air, a knocking sound was heard. His body moved, but he only waved his fist to meet the attack. Thinking like that in his heart, Bowser's movements were fast and fierce. He leaned back to stabilize his body, stretched out his arms and spread out his palms. He patted the middle, looking like he was swatting a fly. Almost at the same time, my figure abruptly disappeared. Rush back. The spirit force slightly led. Yes. Yes. The seventh move of the Tyrant Saber Crescent Moon. Although Wuxia of the Four Heavens realm was still like this under the power of me, it did make me feel some pressure. I couldn't say that so far. Among the opponents I had encountered so far, only Wuxia's strength was the weakest, barely weak enough to not have the qualifications to compete with me. Chapter 1268. The fierce battle allowed the cultivators watching in secret to experience the strength of the Stone Clan up close. What made them even more amazed was the profound heritage of Wuxia from the Nine Heavens realm. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed that an 8th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivator could erupt with such terrifying strength. Each of them had broken through from the 8th Order Divine Sea Realm, and were existences in their respective realms, who could kill enemies above their realm. They all had their own pride, but after this battle, they realized that they were just frogs in a well. Before coming here, they all had a trace of doubt, wondering if there was something wrong with Wuxia's amazing harvest. After all, there were only a few thousand cultivators participating in the Divine Sea Realm battle, and he alone killed more than 200 of them. It was somewhat unreasonable, but now, after witnessing Wuxia's eruption with their own eyes, they realized that such a harvest wasn't unreasonable. However, no one could tell who would win today's battle, because from the looks of it, there wasn't a particularly obvious advantage between the two sides. Every collision was earth-shattering and full of power. The strength of the Sher clan's physique was amazing, and Wuxia's saber technique was equally terrifying. The aggressive aura of the saber made people feel as if some ancient fierce beast was raging. Even though they were watching the battle in the dark, they were invaded by the fierce aura. Their skin hurt, and they felt as if there were fangs and claws hanging above their heads, ready to fall at any time. Every slash of his saber brought with it a dazzling brilliance, and every movement of his body was the most extreme adaptability. Every inch of space was filled with danger. Wuxia could only feel one thing from Wuxia: hard. This was undoubtedly an advantage brought by his physique. Wuxia's flesh and blood didn't just look like a stone. The feedback from the mountain saber also told Wuxia that he was slashing at a stone. Moreover, it was an extremely hard rock. Therefore, Wuxia only needed to defend against Wuxia's frenzied attacks. On the other hand, Wuxia couldn't help but be restrained by Wuxia's counterattacks. After all, he was made of flesh and blood, so it wouldn't be good for him to take a hit from Wuxia. Since the three forms of the Tyrant Saber had failed, Wuxia decided not to use any complicated saber moves. Instead, he only used simple slashes and stabs. Occasionally, he would supplement them with small techniques, such as consecutive slashes and dodges. With his speed and strength, even if he didn't use any saber moves, each of his simple slashes would have a great impact in damage. It was unrealistic to rely solely on the Pan Mountain Saber's sharpness to deal with an opponent like Bao Shi. The Pan Mountain Saber was not known for its sharpness. Even if Wuxia enhanced it with the sharpness spiritual tattoo, it would not be of much use. Wuxia. He always believed that there was no unbreakable defense in this world. Wuxia was only at the Spirit Sea realm, although he had a huge advantage in physique that other races didn't have. As long as the power of the attack was enough, the defense brought by his strong physique could still be broken. So what he had to do now was very simple. He had to find a way to control the rhythm of the battle and make his opponent follow his rhythm. Only in this way could he get rid of this opponent as soon as possible. For a spirit tattooist, especially one that Wuxia was most familiar with, it wasn't difficult to control the rhythm of the battle. Awesome. Bao Shi was clearly in the midst of the battle. He continued to throw punches and shout as he fought against Wuxia's long blade. He had encountered many opponents in the Alpha Origin stage, but none of them had been able to last for too long. Occasionally, he would encounter some strong opponents, but they would never tangle with him. As a result, it had already been more than 2 months, and he hadn't fought to his heart's content. Today's encounter with Lu Ye had undoubtedly made up for the regret in his heart, and made him even more glad that he had followed the revelation of the reincarnation tree to find this place. But the joy in his heart didn't affect his fighting spirit and killing intent. On the contrary, it burned even more fiercely. He naturally had to go all out to kill such a respectable opponent on the spot. Only then would today's battle be complete. Ever since he started cultivating, he had always adhered to the principle that a dead opponent was the best opponent. The sharp light of the saber flashed, and another saber slashed down. The speed was so fast that Wuxia almost didn't have time to react, but he still instinctively raised his arm to block the violent saber. The sound of gold and iron colliding rang out, and a strong halo of light exploded along with the surge of spirit power. Wuxia was about to counterattack when he suddenly felt that something was wrong, because this saber was far heavier than before. The saber momentum was so heavy that even a member of the Sure race like him couldn't help but widen his eyes. His body was suddenly pressed down, and he almost knelt on the ground. What was going on? Wuxia's eyes flashed with surprise and uncertainty. Although they hadn't fought for a long time, he felt that he had figured out the details of Lu Ye's strength. It was undeniable that this little human did indeed have a strength that was completely inconsistent with his body size. But it wasn't enough to make him feel pressured. However, the heaviness of this saber was indeed strangely powerful. It wasn't just the suppression brought about by physical strength, but more like the explosion of another mysterious energy. It had to be said that Wuxia's senses were extremely sharp, because when Lu Ye's saber slashed down, it wasn't just the explosion of his strength, but also the heavy pressure spiritual inscriptions in the mountain saber. In order to be effective in one blow, Lu Ye had evolved as many as 3 layers of heavy pressure spiritual inscriptions, which was also the limit of what he could evolve in an instant. If there were more, the restriction formed by the spiritual inscriptions would not be stable enough. Lu Ye's own strength was already extremely violent, and coupled with the explosion of the heavy pressure spiritual inscriptions, Wuxia suffered a loss. Cries of surprise came from all around. Since the beginning of the battle, Lu Ye had been suppressed in terms of strength, but at this moment, the spectators saw the scene of Bao Shi being suppressed. It was truly inconceivable. Wuxia was furious. For a race that boasted great strength, this kind of suppression was undoubtedly intolerable. With a roar, he suddenly stood up. However, at this moment, the extremely heavy pressure suddenly disappeared without a trace, and the accumulated power of the counterattack fell on empty air. Wuxia felt extremely uncomfortable. Although he forced himself to stand up, he couldn't help but stagger. Lu Ye was already prepared for this. His aura suddenly rose by a large margin, and even his body was shrouded in a layer of faint red blood mist. On his chest, the blood-stained spiritual inscriptions had spread out. When a drop of essence blood exploded, the mountain saber wrapped in a continuous saber light and covered Wuxia. Gasps came from all directions. Everyone was stunned by this scene. They thought that Lu Ye's previous performance was already his limit, but who knew that he still had a trump card? The situation changed in an instant. The originally evenly matched battle was broken at this moment. However, what no one expected was that the one at a disadvantage was actually the Stone Tribe. For Lu Ye, once the rhythm of the battle was under his control, Wuxia was just a target that could only be beaten. His physique was indeed strong, but his weakness was also very obvious. He was not flexible enough. Every race had its own advantages, but it was impossible for all the advantages to be concentrated in one race. While the Stone Tribe had an almost indestructible physique, they were destined to be not very agile. Of course, this was only in a relative sense. A real battle master had to find ways to avoid the enemy's advantages and magnify the enemy's weaknesses in battle. Lu Ye was able to do this by relying on the evolution of the heavy pressure spiritual inscriptions and his rich battle experience. After a round of wild attacks, Wuxia was forced to retreat. No matter how strong his physique was, there was still a limit. It was impossible for him to resist Lu Ye's violent attacks without limit. When he finally stabilized his body and wanted to adjust his posture, Lu Ye's heavy pressure spiritual inscriptions appeared again. They immediately disrupted Wuxia's rhythm and made him extremely annoyed. He suddenly realized that Wuxia from the realm of 9 heavens was not a good person. He thought that he had met an exciting opponent who could go all out. But who knew that Wuxia would use so many little tricks? He really did not care about martial ethics. But he also knew that this was Wuxia's ability. In a life-and-death battle, Wuxia would do anything. Just as he could take advantage of his physique, it was understandable for Wuxia to use some ingenious little tricks in battle. If he could not adapt to it, it was because he was useless. But the more this was the case, the more furious he was. The more furious he was, the more difficult it was to deal with. Often, the knife that he thought was powerful was just a cover. The knife that he thought was not a threat was actually Wuxia's full outbreak. As a result, he could not defend himself against Wuxia's attacks. He became a target for Wuxia's attacks. The cultivators who were secretly watching the battle were too much for their eyes to take in, and all of them were secretly exclaiming in their hearts. It had to be said that watching such a battle had benefited almost everyone greatly, and it also allowed them to clearly understand the huge gap between themselves and these true monstrous geniuses who were ranked at the top. Originally, many people came here with a skeptical attitude. They thought that there must be something wrong with Wuxia's achievement. But after seeing this amazing battle with their own eyes, they knew that even if there was something wrong with his achievement, Wuxia's ranking was well-deserved. The fierce battle was still in full swing. Wuxia was completely at a disadvantage. Although he tried his best to resist, it was useless. Everyone could see that he was fighting like a trapped beast. At this moment, he looked like a porcelain doll that had fallen to the ground. His entire body was covered with spiderweb-like cracks. Even his bald head looked like it was on the verge of shattering. If this continued, he was afraid that he would be smashed to pieces. But he still did not retreat. He was still fighting with Wuxia. He waved his fists and turned every part of his body into a sharp weapon to kill the enemy. He looked like he would not let Wuxia have an easy time even if he died. This kind of fighting spirit and perseverance made all the practitioners watching the battle feel awe. Chapter 1269. The situation of the battle was already very clear. Wuxia of the 9 heavens realm had the upper hand. Although Boulder had an extremely strong physique, he still had the absolute upper hand. In the face of that storm-like attack, he was still powerless. Under such circumstances, defeat and death were only a matter of time. Under such circumstances, what Boulder should do was to rush forward. Retreat. He had already proven his strength, so there was no need to fight to the death. If he went down with his tyrannical physique, if he really wanted to escape, no one could do anything to him. However, he obviously had no intention of retreating. He was still fighting to the death. No one knew what he was holding on to, but that didn't stop him from secretly. The spectating cultivators gave him the highest respect. Perhaps, just like him, it was precisely because he had more perseverance that he could compare to others. Wasn't he stronger? All of a sudden, the sharp and aggressive saber light retracted. The noise in the sky turned into silence. On the battlefield, 2 figures, one big and one small. They stood less than 300 feet apart. Wuxia lowered his head to examine his mountain saber, feeling a little distressed. After this great battle, many small cracks appeared on the mountain saber. Fortunately, when he upgraded the mountain saber, he focused on its quality. Otherwise, if this fight continued, the saber blade would probably break. Boulder's tenacity was unexpected, and the other party's persistence was also difficult to achieve. Expensive, but since they had collided in this situation, then Wuxia, there was no possibility of holding back. He was like this, and so was Boulder. This battle was definitely a battle where both sides had gone all out. In one breath, the final result was that he won and Boulder lost. The price of defeat was not death. Wuxia was still setting up the formation. His movements were not orderly, and he was not slow at all. On the other hand, Yu Yaorao, who was hiding in front of me, endured it. She held her breath and clenched her fists easily. The cultivators hiding in the 7 directions would naturally wait like that. We were also fighting openly and secretly with each other. Once there was friction and collision, this was not an earth-shattering battle. An uproar came from the dark. Even though Boulder was at the front, fighting to the death at every moment was not enough for the spectators to predict my outcome. But when they really saw me shatter into pieces and turn into a pile of rubble, at that time, their hearts still palpitated. The spectating cultivators felt their scalps go numb, and their skin grew numb. He thought that if he were to face such an attack head-on, he would definitely die. Not even dregs were left. Originally, after the appearance of Boulder, the hidden monsters were still there. He didn't want to test Lu Yejin's strength, but in that battle previously, those people had given up on that idea. That was truly adapting to local conditions. Even if he wasn't specifically targeted, that was still me. This was the scene he wanted to see the most. At the same time, he was secretly shocked by Lu Yi's ruthlessness. He was being merciful. You're really afraid of what you're afraid of. I've indeed passed some roads. Jing had inquired about the battle between Lu Yi and Bao Shi, and knew that Bao Shi would enter the arena. Miserable. If he were to fight fairly, he was afraid that he would be. These were Lu Yi's opponents from the Four Heavens realm, but the other party had been stuck at one. This gave me an opportunity to take advantage of it. That guy's harvest wasn't amazing enough, but someone was willing to. You're using your life to increase the number of kills I've made. Even the stone huggers were smashed to pieces. Do we have any stone clan? With such a perverted physique, Ruoxing would only be sending people to Lu Yi. Head. Stating his background and purpose of coming was to pick a fight. The etiquette that a warrior should not have. Accumulating strength under the road was a method to deal with the enemy. She looked old and upright. She was small, but in fact, she was less cunning. Lu Yi stood up and saw through the other party's intentions at a glance. In his field of vision, this young master Imoka was still 70 years old. His aura had not reached an unimaginable level yet. Along the way, passing by, even the void was distorted. From afar a voice sounded, "Little devil Lu Imoka. Young master, I'm here to experience your lowly moves." Imoka was slowly approaching that side, his aura still rising. Seeing this, the corner of young Master Ku's eyes twitched. Originally, you planned to leave that place before you recovered a little, so as not to drag Lu Yi down. But in the current situation, even if you wanted to leave, you would have to leave. Lu Yi was afraid that he would be able to receive that kind of accumulated strength attack. For example, after I used the Fire Phoenix Spirit Pattern attack, these cultivators had won. If an individual could receive it alone, then it was related to the strength of the individual's foundation. It was because he was old that he had exceeded the limit of the Divine Sea realm. Lu Yi returned to his position and silently adjusted his breathing to recover. Moreover, judging from his technique and proficiency in setting up the formation, he was still in the middle of the formation. It was obvious that he didn't have any attainments in the Tao. It was to slow down a little to prevent the formation set up by Lu Yi from being too perfect. After that, Lu Yi was dead. With so few people lurking on all sides, how dare you leave alone? If he opened it, there would definitely be some bad guys on the field. Although there was no point in staying outside, the feeling of being protected by someone was not bad at all. This was not as long as Lu Yi was dead. Someone would dare to find trouble with you. Because the little family saw that you were with Lu Yi, looking for you. The trouble was not provoking Lu Yi. Based on the battle just now, who would dare to touch Lu Yi's head at that time? Ding Yu had died in the battle, and Zhao Yunlu was probably unable to protect himself. You don't think that you're any weaker than Ding Yu and Zhao Yunlu. If you continue like this, the smallest possibility is that you will be killed in a battle. Kill, become a part of someone else's harvest. Until now, the battle for the Divine Sea had not yet retreated to the earliest stage. Only half a month was left. Let's just say that he was still alive. The number of cultivators was probably very small. They hadn't even persisted until now. Naturally, the cultivators who were still alive were all magnanimous, lest they offend someone and be taken advantage of. That was both an insult to the weak and a fear of being defeated in a battle, taking advantage of it. There was no justice in that. 800 feet across from him, even though his entire body was broken, he still stood proudly. At the very beginning of his life, he only looked at Lu Yi. He nodded slightly. That guy, was he a weapon cultivator? How did he know about formations? But no matter what, when would he be able to witness such two top-notch monsters? The battle between the monstrous geniuses was also a wasted trip. Yu Yara was quite embarrassed. You clearly didn't want to rely on others. You had the same idea, but things just had to develop like that. The land 10 miles away passed in the blink of an eye. When Mok Xiao carried the destruction of the heavens, when the earth-shattering power crashed down, a transparent light curtain suddenly appeared. It suddenly appeared out of thin air and enveloped the location where Lu Yi and Yu Yara were. Tightly sealed. Right now, those who were not qualified to challenge Lu Yi of the Four Heavens realm were probably the only ones. There were no more top-notch monsters ranked at the bottom. Moreover, after hugging them, before Shirizhan died, it was especially important that these people would still come to challenge him. It was known. It could be seen that today, you just need to stay outside quietly. It's very unlikely that you'll survive until the very end. Without a gust of wind whistling past, Boulder's burly body rumbled. Suddenly, it collapsed and turned into pieces of fine rubble. Boulder had not been chopped to death by Lu Yi yet. And Mok shouted he know how to perform? But now that the arrow is under the bowstring, I've already reported it. With his background and purpose of coming here, he had accumulated enough momentum. If it was just that if he gave up halfway, he would only be ridiculed. If he had known that Lu Yi was proficient in formations, Mok Xiao would have said anything. He would have gathered his strength and come here. That was not asking for trouble at all. When the voice sounded, the cultivators who were secretly paying attention were all excited. Because under the revelation of the reincarnation tree, Mok Xiao was ranked lower than Boulder. He was 8 ranks lower, below the 7th position. Compared to Boulder's appearance, Mok Xiao suspected that he was going to be overbearing. Little, and it was obvious that he was unprepared. I was accumulating power as I ran. Momentum, that should be a secret technique. Its effect was similar to Lu Yi activating the fire phoenix. The phoenix spirit pattern was not similar. The longer it took to accumulate power, the more ferocious it would be. Fierce. At the side, Yu Yara wanted to say something but hesitated several times. In the end, she sighed. She didn't say anything. However, everyone maintained a tacit understanding. This was not a battlefield protection. It was held in the inner circle, with Yenkong as the center, 70 miles away. The inner circle was filled with soldiers. But what can someone say to me? That's not my hand. Duan. The less power I accumulate in that secret technique, the more it erupts. The more ferocious it was, the more I thought that I wouldn't be able to use it to settle the score. From afar, I saw that Lu Yi was actually setting up a formation. But on second thought, that might not be a bad thing for you. Time passed, and there was no sound of battle in the 7 weeks. Huge and small light burst out with the surge of spiritual power. Mok Xiao immediately felt wonderful, because the feeling from behind was very strong. Tough. It was as if my entire body had crashed into a swamp. Originally, although your strength was strong, against those who obtained the first victory, in the end, there was still a small amount of confidence, especially when one was heavily injured. In such a battle, the more you were at the front, the less danger you would encounter. Young Master Mok must have heard about Lu Yi and Boulder from some sources. A battle between them. So even if I was a top-notch genius from a top-notch realm, even a monster dared to underestimate Yin Kong. Therefore, my response was very complicated. With a raise of my hand, array flags flew out one by one. Spiritual energy surged, and the yin and yang 7 primordial hooks intertwined. 10 miles away, young Master Mok's aura had yet to reach an extreme. To an astonishing extent, this was simply an old man who had surpassed the divine sea realm. In the domain, violent spiritual energy spread out from the 7 primordial hooks. Even the cultivators watching from afar could sense that young Master Mok had reached his limit. He even revealed a tendency to find it difficult to control his own strength. I immediately understood that Lu Yi's attainments in the Tao of formations were lower than he thought. The formation set up by the other party was not this weak. What he blocked was that at the same time, he was able to cut off and strengthen his own power. Powerful. Just half a day before Yin Kang's battle with Boulder, a sharp aura spread out. That aura suddenly approached from nearby. As soon as that aura appeared, it was extremely weak. As far as the eye could see, there was a rainbow light in this direction that was like lightning. As it approached, its aura became weaker and weaker. Matthew have also thought of the only two things that junior brother Lu didn't have. The first time he had good intentions. It was inevitable that he would receive such a small and direct reward for his release. He sighed with emotion. As expected, he still had to have good intentions and form less good karma with others. Because when would there be no good fortune in return? Chapter 1270. Trapped in the Great Formation, the accumulated power was instantly greatly affected. The weakening and obstruction caused Makoto to roar angrily, unable to protect his strength at all. Leave the ground to bloom in torrents. The place where the whole person is almost turned into a ball. The ball of light that was ignited by spiritual energy made it impossible for people to see his true body clearly. Cracking sounds rang out, and a translucent array light screen appeared. Cracks appeared on it, and it looked like it could not hold on for much longer. After all, this was a formation that Lu Yi had set up in a hurry. The strength of the protection was naturally not strong, but it was used to block Makoto's attack. However, it was barely enough to block the attack. At the same time, a crashing sound was heard, and the protective formation was broken. Lu Yi's entire body soared into the sky. The many cultivators who were secretly watching this scene could only vaguely see Lu Yi's figure. His figure turned into a long rainbow and intersected with Makoto. In the next moment, a puff of hot blood floated down from the sky, and a muffled groan sounded. At this time, Makoto quickly left and disappeared in the blink of an eye. In that instant, the outcome of the confrontation had been decided. Lu Yi's expression was calm, and there was not a single scar on his body. Everyone knew that Makoto had been defeated, and he should have been beaten up. He was injured, but no one knew the exact extent of his injuries. This group of people came aggressively and ran away extremely quickly. Their actions were very aggressive, straightforward and nimble. Compared to the bloody battle between Boulder and Lu Yi, Makoto's, there was no doubt that the challenge was not very entertaining, but everyone knew that this was no less dangerous than the previous battle. And it was even more dangerous than the previous one. It was just that Makoto cherished his life even more, so he immediately escaped. After he failed to make a move, he immediately ran away. On the contrary, he hugged the stone and fought to the death. In the end, he was beaten to a pulp, causing people to sigh with regret. Previously, the two weaklings in the bottom 10 of the rankings had challenged him later. Broken halberd sinking into the sand, with one dead and one injured. It made the dark cultivators who were paying attention realize the value of being ranked first. Before witnessing such two confrontations, no one would think that it would take 4 days. There was no problem with Jie Yu's ranking. The corner of Wei Piao's eyes twitched. It was enough to not have one battle like this. There was no need to really. It was not necessary to kill one party. For a ghost cultivator, he definitely had the confidence to be undetected by the enemy. Since he felt that he would be able to kill him in one strike, he might as well make his move. He had to put himself in danger. Even Mion was silently cursing in his heart. Sure enough, those with thick eyebrows and small eyes were all present. Is there something wrong with it, wasting our spectators? My respect. Junior martial brother Lu knew that there was no secret between Lu Yi and Yu Ping in the confrontation, but from the strange atmosphere just now, there was no Lu Yi's. Judging from some of the big movements, in such a secret confrontation, the ghost screen was obviously. You have found an opportunity to make a move, so you might as well reveal it in a small way. He changed his figure. Yu Ping turned to look at Lu Yi and said calmly, "Do you think that time? The weakest opponent of the Alpha Origin stage would be Gu Yulo. One of them was his eldest son, who was known to be a femme fatale. It was difficult for him to be seduced by beauty. What we can do is take the long run." Lu Yi glanced at Yu indifferently. A man of few words also goes far. Far. Huasher crossed his arms and chuckled at the side, holding back his laughter. She glared at me and said, "What are you laughing at? If you laugh again, I'll knock his teeth out." The talkative Boucher suddenly became silent, and he turned his body. He sat cross-legged outside, his expression solemn and focused. So although they didn't say it explicitly, both of them knew that in the calendar, before the next life and death battle, there was no reason for them to fight each other again. There was no reason to fight. The frequency of the 7th week's battles was getting lower and lower. The aftermath of the battle came from all directions. This time, the battle had not yet reached the end. In the previous stage, if they didn't want to win, they would naturally have arrived. When they exerted their strength, after Wei Piaozi and Lu Yi's side, they welcomed the 1st and 7th challenge, winning both battles. Junior Marshal Brother Lu felt that no one would come to challenge me, especially the two who were now ranked in front of Lu Yi. The first one, no matter what position he was in, would appear if he did. As the voice sounded, Junior Marshal Brother Lu was horrified to discover that he was. The space nearby twisted slightly, and then a delicate figure appeared. A big figure appeared like a ghost. Lu Yi was silent for a moment, and then he buried the rubble again. He went back. Now it seemed that the two of them had not given up. Yuping they hadn't appeared yet. It was obvious that they were looking for an opportunity to make a move. It was a pity that they couldn't succeed. At that stage, they couldn't just rely on dodging to reach the front. The reincarnation tree's revelation came every 8 or 7 days. If they wanted to stay in the crowd, they wouldn't have enough kills. If they had enough kills, they would be reincarnated. If the tree's revelation was marked, they would only become the target of others' attacks. That guy, shouldn't he be dead? Lu Yi walked back to his original position and continued to sit down to rest. He also followed over and even fought with Junior Marshal Brother Lu, as if he was familiar with him. Junior Marshal Brother Lu was stunned for a while before he reacted. He was secretly distressed, but it was also possible for you to leave at that time. It was possible. Your injuries had yet to recover, and now the battle for the Divine Sea had reached its climax. At the critical moment, once you leave that place, you will probably last for half a day. Suddenly, on such a small wave of sand, the number of cultivators still alive was broken. It kept increasing. He didn't see the situation clearly. After those two, he still beat him to death. If they were alive, how could they be able to coexist peacefully with tacit understanding? Actually, he was trying to understand what those top-notch monsters were thinking. Yuping glared at me hatefully before turning around and rushing in one direction. She shouted, "I won. What if he wants to try?" Yellow Dragon Realm, Ancient Jade Tower. Thus, I immediately knew the identity of the person who had come. Actually, there was something too simple. Lu Yi had heard from Wuxia. When his lower body felt the battle intent, he naturally wouldn't be on guard against me. In response, Wuxia hadn't died once under Lu Yi's hands, and he would be even more self-centered. It was interesting. You looked left and right, but you still understood where that piece of work came from. Where did it come from? Wuxia said with a meaningful expression. You're afraid of being smashed to pieces. Are you afraid that he'll knock your teeth out? Other people were afraid of Yuping, but I was really afraid. I was afraid, because Yuping's methods were of no use to me. There were almost no strong points in his lower body that he couldn't use, except for Lu Yi. Smashing me to pieces like this is an advantage the Stone Clan doesn't have. The race had a law to imitate. With a sigh in his heart, he could only accept his fate for the time being. Wei Piaozi's light. When he didn't have the chance, he would repay it. As if he had sensed the movement below his head, he shrank a little. Wuxia, who was about the size of a child, raised his head and looked at Lu Yi. He grinned foolishly. Rest for a while. Lu Yi was non-committal, and the cultivators who were watching in secret were also in an uproar. After that, there was an uproar. Seeing that Wuxia knew that he was an enemy, he fought to the death. They all gave me the lowest respect from the bottom of their hearts. His choice didn't seem stupid, but he was afraid of the enemy's persistence and hard work. However, it moved everyone and was worthy of respect. Only now did they know that this route was originally a foolish and fearful persistence, but he was able to escape. Of course. After you spoke and appeared, Junior brother Lu didn't even sense the slightest bit of your aura until you suddenly appeared. He only saw one person. Time passed, and the reincarnation tree's revelation descended once again. Wuxia leaped out of the pit, gravel flying everywhere, and Lu Yi explained, "That's your Stone Clan's innate ability. Are you lying to him? You were really killed by him." The situation in the field was no longer strange. Originally, only Lu Yi wasn't there. He had brought junior brother Lu, but now Wuxia was missing. He looked silly, but in fact, he didn't even have a moment to act. He sat there, chatting with junior brother Lu for a while, and asking Lu Yi for a while. That was the question. Therefore, no one in the Alpha Origin realm was afraid of that person who came from the north. As for the ghost cultivators of the Nether Ghost territory, this was none other than Wuxia. The ghost cultivators who were hiding in the dark were the most threatening. That way. Then he revealed his figure. It was a kind of concession, and also a kind of statement. It was an attitude that he was willing to clash with Lu Yi. There was not the slightest bit of aura around him. But this person was very beautiful. When he appeared, Lu Yi faintly felt a trace of pressure. Yu Ping glanced at junior brother Lu indifferently, and her voice was clear and warm. "Water. If you're beautiful, you can hug a leg as long as you're careful." Congratulations to him. Wei Piao, who was sitting cross-legged on the spot to recover, was slightly stunned. "Because I found something strange. This period of time, I made my own beheading. The number obtained has not increased compared to the next revelation. And the one ranked first is Wuxia from the seven-color domain." As Yu Ping's voice fell, a figure slowly walked over. The person who came had an imposing appearance, and his appearance was excellent. His hand was holding a silver spear. Although Lu Yi didn't want to pay attention to me, he didn't have a life after that. Fighting to the death was completely reasonable, but it also seemed to be amiable, so he didn't talk. They chatted casually with each other. He finally understood what was going on with the strange atmosphere just now. Hot sweat instantly wet his clothes, and he cried out in alarm, "Yu Ping!" Junior brother Lu didn't know what had happened, but he instinctively felt that. He felt that the atmosphere was not right. It was as if there was nothing wrong with Mo Xiao Xiao. Safety was about to arrive. In the pit, a large figure was sitting cross-legged. There was not the slightest bit of life on it, as if it was not a stone. However, its forehead refracted a dark luster under the sunlight. After thinking for a moment, he got up and went to the place where Wuxia had died. He saw that the ground was covered in rubble. He didn't know when it had appeared. There was a hole. It was a man. He could see his face clearly because he wore a mask under his face, with a ghastly mask that covered a small part of his face, and with a head full of hair. His white hair was tied in front of his head, and he wore a tight-fitting white robe. Some of his exposed skin was filled with simple lines. Wei Piao's face immediately turned red, but he didn't refute anything. Original heart, technically speaking, you don't want to rely on anyone, but in terms of the actual situation, you are indeed Toby on Lu Yi's wings. Otherwise, that kind of place, that kind of environment, there is no place for you. With that kind of strength, he deserved to be at the top of the list. Wei Piao's pinky also rested under the Pan Shan saber, and rubbed it heavily. Wait. Now even Mo Xiao, who was ranked 7th, was one of Yu Yara's opponent. I also know that no one who isn't ranked at the bottom has come to challenge me. It wasn't until an incense stick's worth of time ago that a long sigh suddenly sounded in his ears. A voice sounded, "The first place, as expected, is a false name." Chapter 1271. Many of the cultivators who were secretly paying attention recognized Guyulo, so they began to look forward to it. Now Lu Yi had 3 people ranked in the top 10. They came to challenge him. Baoshi was smashed to pieces, and Makoto struck him back. Yu Ping didn't seem to find a suitable opportunity to make a move. I wonder what Guyulo's performance will be like? Since ancient times, the confrontation between the first and second ranked had never. Lu Yi and Liangu were the most worthy of attention and anticipation. If Lu Yi could defeat Yulo, then no one would be able to shake his position at the top. He would also be the true number 1 in this Divine Sea battle. What kind of flames would emerge from the collision between the two? It was very concerning. Under the gaze of many pairs of eyes, Guyulo carried his silver spear and walked straight to the pile of rubble. He looked at the rubble in silence for a while. A moment later, he raised his head and looked at Bao Shi. "You were killed." Bao Shi crossed his arms and answered calmly. Da-da-da-da. He didn't feel the slightest bit guilty, because he had died in battle once. How embarrassing. Guyulo nodded and placed his spear in front of him. He sat down cross-legged. Yu Ping raised her eyebrows. She was confused by his actions. She couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you here to challenge him? Why aren't you moving?" "And?" Guyulo lowered his eyes and replied indifferently, "I can't beat him." Bao Shi looked at Yu Ping in confusion. The price is a background. Why should the ghost clan of the northern underworld worry about Guyulo's heart? The number of people gathered on Luiya's side decreased, and it became quiet. Yes, the Battle of the Alpha Origin Divine Sea, which happened once every 100 years in history, was as bad as retreating. There had never been such a strange scene in the early stages of the journey. A few of the top monsters ranked at the bottom went to the 7 places to hunt and improve their slashes. Instead, they sat quietly outside and waited. Wuxia chuckled and said, "What you were thinking? That's him. Is he trying to take advantage of the situation when the other side is in a heated battle to reap the benefits of the fishermen?" Ah, how simple and crude that lineup was. It was enough to make anyone look at it. Intimidating. There was no agreement or discussion. It was just a spontaneous and natural behavior. However, we seemed to get along quite well. Among the revelations of the reincarnation tree, those ranked in the bottom 10 gathered outside. After gathering one, the remaining people were all ranked within the top 80. 7 figures were gathered in the large area in front of him. Among them, except for Yu Yaorao, the remaining 7 were all ranked at the bottom. Of the top 10, the 1st, 7th and 8th were all present, even if they were boulders. That first place was not a reflection of his strength. If he really wanted to be ranked according to his strength. Calculating, if I am only ranked first. The range of activity within Alpha Origin had not yet been reduced to the top 10,000. The square has been rounded out, but the struggle has not yet begun, because it has not yet been decided. The top 100 candidates. Yu Ping was clearly annoyed. Yao Shangyun, he's from the Yao family. If Xiang Yin returned with first place, his family's elders would definitely forgive him. Guyulo looked like he was too lazy to explain. On the other hand, he was holding Shi in his arms. He chuckled from the side. "I've fought with you before, so I know you're right. Pass." It did not matter if he would encounter an enemy or a friend in the future when he traveled the starry sky. Every encounter outside was a kind of fate, so everyone tacitly agreed. That was a rule. It's not just Yu Ping who finds it interesting. To an earth-shattering small battle, the cultivators who were watching in the dark were also shocked. They felt that it was interesting. Therefore, when those people gathered, the other cultivators were happy to hear about it. It was a happy scene to see, because we used it to think about the next line. When encountering the Yellow Dragon Realm, and encountering a weakling like Yu Ping, they were even more worried. They were worried that they would encounter this murderous Luiya of the Four Heavens realm. It wasn't that no one had the qualifications to come later. When it came to integrating into such an ordinary large group, some of them were gone. There were enough top-notch monsters to kill. In other words, even if it was before we didn't have any gains, it was enough to guarantee that we would be ranked. It was at the back of the room. These cultivators ranked in the top 80 didn't have the courage at all to integrate into that outer space. As he said that, he sat down with 2 short blades in his hands. The blades flew around his fingertips as he played with them lazily. He could only try his best to lower his presence. The bad thing was that Lu Yi was sitting beside you was close, not a small figure. Sometimes there were engravings. He was providing you with tangible protection. That group of cultivators was only at the Divine Sea realm for the time being, and they were about to advance to the Star realm. For the old monsters of Xiao, suspicion was also an extremely precious body. Test. Lu Yi was filled with wine by you, but he still said something bad. Is that so? Over there, the wine cups were crisscrossed, the cold silence was noisy, the other place of the Alpha Origin realm. However, there was a hidden danger, and the fight was broken. On the same heaven and earth, the two of them. There was an extremely sharp contrast between the two situations. You seem to have determined that there is nothing between Lu Yi and Yu Yaorao. Otherwise, two cultivators who were born in the same realm would be able to tell the truth. How could they come together? Moreover, the weaker one was still protecting him everywhere. He was protecting the stronger one. Yuping immediately looked as if she expected better from him and said angrily, "You haven't even fought with him. How do you know you can't beat him?" Yao Xiang was also confused. What was going on? What had he chosen? The resting place he chose quickly evolved into a gathering place for the weak. At the gathering place, first Hugging Stone was walking, followed by Yuping and Huang. Dragon Realm ran over and joined us. As time passed, gradually, silhouettes began to gather from all directions, one after another. They found a place to sit cross-legged quietly. In the midst of his drunkenness, Lu Yi was very clear about the situation over there. How did it develop to that point? I only wanted to recover because Yu Yaorao wanted to recuperate, and I was too lazy to hide in the hiding place. So I stayed outside and waited. The other party came to challenge me because I was confident in my own strength, but was it a coincidence that he had attracted so many top geniuses? Gather. Now at that time, the demons who dared to gather and could gather. Evil, they were all candidates who could basically get the winning spots, and they were all at the bottom of the rankings. If we are ranked at the bottom, we intend to participate in the next competition. It might not be a bad thing for us cultivators. Little Jiagao made friends with some like-minded fellow Taoists outside. If you can't broaden your horizons, you won't have the chance to see other things. See all kinds of things. Yao Shengyun said indifferently. Ancient Jade Tower's first place is lacking you. Once. After a few more words of persuasion, I saw that Huang Longjia was really indifferent. Yuping finally couldn't help but sigh. Interesting. But judging from the results, it seemed that it was still wrong. Yuping couldn't help but glare at me. It's none of his business. At the very front. At this juncture, the battles everywhere became more frequent than before. The battles between cultivators before encountering each other were more frequent. They were also more ferocious. In less than 2 days, the number of cultivators gathered there had not exceeded 10. More than 10 people had gathered, and the number was still increasing. But Lu Yi was also able to beat Huashur as an opponent. His body was smashed to pieces. In comparison, there was simply no need to end a direct confrontation. Huang Longjie could roughly judge Lu Ye's strength. Strength level. Yu Yarao's pressure was like a mountain. She wanted Lu Yi and Huang Longjie to fight until both sides suffered. Yuping, who had picked up the scraps, walked to Lu Ye's side unscrupulously. She wrapped one hand around my neck and pinched a head smaller than a human head in the other. She poured wine into Lu Ye's mouth. "Give me a drink." "What are you pretending to be?" You can see that they are used to being sanctimonious on the surface, but in fact they are. "What a cunning fellow," Yuping advised earnestly. "But he Yao Shengyun is still a card. How can the signboard be smashed under his hands?" As the most outstanding cultivator of Ancient Jade Tower, an outstanding Spirit Sea Realm warrior, he had to take responsibility for Guyulo. It was his responsibility to bring back another number 1. Apart from the Alpha Origin realm of the reincarnation tree, where else could they gather at once? Gathering so few cultivators from all over the starry sky. Even if a small family was promoted to a constellation and walked in the starry sky, there would definitely be no similar experience. The Yellow Dragon realm seemed to be very careful about the number 1 bad guy in that battle. Yuping was extremely diligent, but the 2 people behind you didn't have any confidence in being able to kill them. But you were sure that those 2 fellows would fight. Get up, this is not a rare opportunity for you. If you said that you would definitely be able to do something about it, then you would be able to kill both of them. Kill them. For any cultivator, that kind of experience was something that could be obtained. It was rare. An opponent who could kill a monster like Huashur, a small figure. The probability was another monster. The Yellow Dragon realm did not have such a monster. The thought of fighting, Those who were not cold-hearted bad guests took out their own realm from their storage bags. The fine wine and delicacies of the domain were shared with others. They came from the same realm. In the domain, the evildoers who were supposed to be at odds with each other were actually playing tricks on the outside. The foreign lands had reached a situation of harmonious coexistence. The number of people gradually decreased, and a few days ago, in that large area, the number of cultivators gathered was not less than 70, and all of them looked angry. Their breaths were heavy. In such an atmosphere, even the proud and aloof Yellow Dragon realm could avoid blending in and retreating. No one would have thought that before the Yellow Dragon realm came, there would be someone with Lu Yi. He did not have any conflict. He only said a few complicated words before settling down. He sat down quietly beside them. Someone came in and out. They hadn't even persevered until then. The distance, the first one was only one step away from victory. Who would be willing to go in and out? They were all biting. Fong persisted, hoping that he could last longer than others. That sentence didn't sound like a mouthful, but Yuping still understood. The meaning of Stone's words was that the Yellow Dragon realm had obviously not interacted with Wuxia after that. Some people knew the exact outcome, but only from the perspective of the situation. Judging from this battle was evenly matched, even if the Yellow Dragon realm won slightly. I'm afraid there's no limit to winning. Unfortunately, the Yellow Dragon realm is completely moved, no matter what you do. Confusion is only a passing wind. For a weak person like me, once I recognize it, it's very difficult for people in the sect to change my views and persist in something. Of course, staying in such a place where top monsters gather, you always feel that. You don't have any qualifications. You also know that with your own strength. You really have the qualifications to stay in such an agreed place, but at that time, even if you don't have the courage to leave, you can still leave. Chapter 1272. This situation lasted for about 10 days. When a loud buzzing sound was heard, everyone instantly understood that the battle for the Divine Sea was over, and the final 100 winners had been determined. Cultivators who were in conflict with each other in various Alpha Origin locations stopped and retreated, maintaining a safe distance. Nearly 3 months of persistence and conflict was all for this moment. Now that the conflict was over, there was naturally no need for them to continue fighting. At the place where Lu Yi and the others gathered, everyone drank from their cups of wine and waited silently. There was originally a sun hanging in the sky, but at this moment, another sun suddenly rose. The second sun was bright, but it was not blinding. Its light was resplendent, and it gave off a gentle feeling. As the second sun rose into the sky, it suddenly trembled and turned into hundreds of balls of light. Some were big, some were small, and all of them were of different sizes. The biggest one was more than 10 times the size of the smallest one. After these balls of light split, they immediately flew in all directions, as if they had a mind of their own, landing in the bodies of the Alpha Origin cultivators. As the champion of the Divine Sea battle, Lu Yi had undoubtedly obtained the largest ball of light. Because he had already fulfilled his expectations, he did not dodge or resist. When this ball of light entered his body, Lu Yi felt a warm feeling all over his body, as if the fatigue of the past few days had been swept away in an instant, and his energy had become much more vigorous. Besides this, there didn't seem to be anything special, but upon closer inspection, he could clearly sense something. There was a mysterious power in his flesh and blood. This power could not be activated for the time being, but it did not harm him in the slightest, and was only temporarily stored in his body. He understood that only when he broke through to the Divine Sea and advanced to the constellation realm would this temporary power truly play a role, giving him the ability to connect to the starry sky. Moreover, this ball of light from the Alpha Origin stage was very beneficial to a cultivator's growth. As for what kind of benefits it would bring, Lu Yi did not know. He would only be able to slowly sense it after advancing to the constellation realm. Every cultivator who remained in the Alpha Origin stage had obtained their own backup spirit light. No matter how small the amount was, it was more than enough for their own advancement. Yu Yara looked at Lu Yi gratefully. Honestly speaking, if it wasn't for the fact that she stayed with Lu Yi at the last moment and avoided conflicts with other people, she definitely wouldn't have been able to get into the top 100, and it was very likely that she would have been eliminated. If she were to be eliminated under such circumstances, the only thing that awaited her was death, unless she was willing to give up and leave early. The spiritual light entered his body without any delay, and a powerful repulsive force was transmitted from all directions. Thus, everyone knew that it was time to leave. A cultivator cupped his fists and said, "Fellow Taoists, in the future when we travel the starry sky, if fate brings us together, please take care of us." Of course, this was just a formality. After leaving this place, the chances of these cultivators meeting again in the future in the starry sky were not high. The starry sky was vast, and everyone came from different realms. Wanting to meet again in the vast starry sky was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But anything was possible. Today's encounter could be said to be the beginning of future friendship. They were all the top geniuses of the remaining Tao, so naturally, they would appreciate each other. Some returned the greeting, while others remained silent. The repulsive force from all directions grew stronger, and one figure after another began to disappear as the void distorted. On the white jade platform of the reincarnation tree, after a 3-month gap, it became lively again. However, compared to the spectacular scene of thousands of divine sea cultivators entering the alpha origin stage nearly 3 months ago, only 100 returned this time, which undoubtedly reduced the liveliness by a lot. The experts whose juniors had gained something were naturally grinning from ear to ear. However, there were even more people whose juniors had died in the alpha origin stage, and could only watch enviously as the old and young reunited. It was truly a situation where some were happy while others were sad. As the champion of this divine sea battle, Lu Yi attracted the attention of many masters as soon as he returned. When he entered the alpha origin stage, he caused a commotion because he was among the 9th order divine sea realm cultivators. Of course, he was the most special one. After all, he was the most special one among the 8th order divine sea realm cultivators. After all, 8th order cultivators were too eye-catching. But no one had expected that an 8th order cultivator from an inconspicuous world domain, who had been recognized by many masters for not too long, would actually take the first place. Over the generations, those who could win the top 10 positions in the alpha origin stage would all have great achievements in the future, let alone first place. Before Lu Ye's return, many masters had privately discussed and inquired about the location of the 9 heavens realm. But no matter how much they discussed, no one mentioned the name of the 9 heavens realm. In the previous divine sea battles, there had been no precedent of this realm participating. It was as if this realm had suddenly popped out of a corner, leaving no trace behind. This was not surprising. There were so many realms in the starry sky, and even the most knowledgeable cultivator would not dare to say that they knew all of them like the back of their hand. Not all large realms would send cultivators to participate in the divine sea battle. Although many large realms were qualified to participate, they did not have the means to do so, so they had never shown themselves in front of the world. Therefore, many masters felt that the 9 heavens realm should be one of them. Perhaps there had been cultivators from the 9 heavens realm who had participated in the divine sea battle in the past, but they had all faded into the crowd and did not cause any waves. So naturally, no one knew about them. Just like this time, there were thousands of realms participating in the divine sea battle, but now, besides those particularly famous realms, who would bother to record the results of the obscure realms? On the white jade platform, Lu Yi keenly sensed many hostile gazes and looked over, only to find that they were from a group of blood race and insect race masters. He understood that his actions against the blood race and insect race in the alpha origin stage could not be hidden from these fellows. Although they did not know exactly what had happened in the alpha origin stage, he had gained some benefits from killing his enemies, which would raise his ranking. As long as they paid attention to the rise in the ranking, they should be able to guess who killed their juniors. These blood race and insect race masters had clearly determined that their juniors had died at their hands. If it weren't for the fact that this was not the right place, they would have come to make trouble. Well done. A familiar voice sounded, and Yang Qing appeared beside him. He smiled and praised, blocking the gazes of the blood race and insect race masters. Lu Yi nodded slightly. He could tell that Yang Qing seemed to be in a good mood, and he did not know what good things had happened to him. Naturally, he didn't know that it was precisely because of his performance this time that Yang Qing had already reaped a bountiful harvest. A 9-star dragon pearl had allowed him to take away as much as 30% of the treasures in the treasure pool. Although the value of each treasure wasn't too high, the advantage was in the quantity. In the future, he only needed to find an opportunity to exchange these treasures for spirit jade, and he would not have to worry about the resources needed to recover. He increasingly felt that it was a wise decision to bring Lu Yi to the reincarnation tree to participate in the Divine Sea battle. Otherwise, how could he have obtained so many benefits so easily? Even an expert like him was very bored as he searched for treasures in the starry sky. One had to endure a great deal of loneliness and dullness in life without spiritual jades. Since the matter was over, Yang Qing did not plan to stay any longer and was about to leave with Lu Yi. But before the two could move, Yu Yarao led a middle-aged man with an extraordinary bearing over. Yu Yarao had specially come to express her gratitude. She had already briefly explained her experience in the Alpha Origin stage to her family's elders, and said that it was all thanks to Lu Ye's protection that they were able to safely emerge victorious. This Yu Yao realm elder was also a grateful person, and no matter what, he had to personally thank Lu Yi. After exchanging some pleasantries, Yu Yarao's elders sincerely expressed their gratitude to Lu Yi. After that, they invited Lu Yi to visit the 9 Profound World, if he had the chance. The entire 9 Profound World would treat him as their most distinguished guest. Lu Yi naturally agreed. As for whether he would go or not, he did not even know where the 9 Mysteries world was. So how could he go? He could only leave it to fate. While Lu Yi was exchanging pleasantries with Yu Yarao, Yang Qing stood to the side with his hands clasped behind his back, looking proud and arrogant. The Yu Yao realm elder did not mind at all. A 9-star treasure was not something that the Moon Jade realm could compare to. He knew his own limits, so he wouldn't do something that would only invite ridicule upon himself. It was very lively here. At the edge of the white jade platform, Do Liang let out a long sigh. "Martial uncle, let's go." The cultivator beside Do Liang said, "This is a rare opportunity. Aren't you going to greet Big Brother?" Do Liang shook his head. "No need, martial uncle. Fellow Taoist Lu, and I only met by chance. If I have the chance to see him win first place, it can be considered as witnessing history." Since he had not participated before, there was no need to interfere now. It would only disturb his state of mind. In the future, when this disciple is promoted to a constellation mansion, if fate allows, we will definitely meet face to face in the starry sky. The cultivator nodded lightly. This was also good. His martial nephew was also proud and arrogant. If he went to congratulate Lu Yi, it would be obvious that he was trying to curry favor with him. This was something that no ambitious cultivator would do. Moreover, Do Liang wasn't wrong. He'd only met Lu Yi by chance, and the two of them should have left. However, they decided to stay and watch because they saw Lu Yi's ranking. Now that the outcome had been decided, there was naturally no need for them to continue staying. To Do Liang, he had thought that Lu Yi from the heavenly realm was the same as him. But in the end, Lu Yi had killed his way to the top of the rankings. He had obtained the greatest glory in this Divine Sea battle, but due to some unavoidable reasons, he had been forced to leave the Alpha Origin stage early. In comparison, even if he said he did not care, he could not help but feel a little disappointed. Chapter 1273. Junior Brother Lu, take care. I hope we can meet again in the future. On the white jade platform, Yu Yarao bowed. Lu Yi cupped his fists in return, turned around, and followed Yang Qing out. The battle for the Divine Sea had ended, and the masters from different domains had no reason to stay any longer. So they each took their juniors and returned home. The next time such a lively scene could be seen at the reincarnation tree, It would most likely be another 100 years later. Walking out of the white jade platform and entering a passage, Yang Qing continued to walk forward. After a long time, he came to a door and turned to Lu Yi. Remember this position. If you bring your juniors to participate in the battle for the Divine Sea in the future, you must pass through here when you return. Lu Yi nodded silently, vaguely understanding the meaning behind Yang Qing's words, but he was not in a hurry to ask. Yang Qing pushed open the door and entered. Lu Yi followed closely behind, stepping through the door. What they stepped into was not a room as they had imagined, but a vast expanse of starry sky that seemed to have shrunk countless times. Everywhere they looked, they were surrounded by a vast expanse of starry sky. It was a magnificent sight, and one could feel how small and insignificant they were. Yang Qing raised his hand and gently tapped the void in front of him, and a ripple spread out from the point of his finger. When the ripple disappeared, Yang Qing could not help but frown, raising his head and asking, "Old Shu, what is the meaning of this?" Under normal circumstances, his finger could open a passage to the 9 regions and take Lu Yi back to the 9 regions. But at this moment, the passage did not appear, which seemed a little strange. No passage appeared. Obviously the reincarnation tree was interfering, or rather, the reincarnation tree did not let them through. But he did not know why. An ancient voice suddenly sounded in this small part of the starry sky. "Dragon Monarch, don't worry. It's just that this little friend beside you is carrying something he shouldn't have taken away." Yang Qing raised his brow and turned to look at Lu Yi, looking him up and down. Lu Yi immediately looked a little uncomfortable, scratching his ears and cheeks. Something had happened. Previously, he had been acting sneakily, thinking that no one would know. Moreover, after such a long time, no one had come to find trouble with him. He had thought that this was the end of the matter. Who would have thought that before he left, the reincarnation tree would intercept him? To think that he had been hiding them for such a long time in the alpha origin stage, in order to avoid being exposed. Even when facing an opponent like Bai Shi, he didn't release the 2 little ones to bless him with blessings. Thinking about it carefully, he thought that he had done it secretly, but since he had done it in the tree world, how could the reincarnation tree not know? The reason why the reincarnation tree hadn't looked for him for such a long time was because it wasn't the right time yet. Now that he was about to leave, the reincarnation tree naturally couldn't sit idly by and do nothing. However, the feeling of being caught red-handed was really embarrassing. Yang Qing didn't know what the reincarnation tree was talking about. But when she saw Lu Ye's appearance, she understood that this kid really did take something he shouldn't have. She couldn't help but laugh. When Divine Sea stage cultivators came to the reincarnation tree, they would all bow down and worship it. They would even follow behind their elders for a few steps, afraid that they would embarrass themselves if they took the wrong path. This kid, on the other hand, actually stole something when she wasn't paying attention. This kid was too bold. She immediately snapped, "Take it out." Lu Yi couldn't bear to part with it, so he evaded the question. "What is it?" Yang Qing glared at him. "How would I know what it is? Don't talk nonsense. Take it out when I tell you to." The old voice sounded again, this time very gentle. "Little friend, it is not suitable for the demon race to be brought to the outside world. If news of this spreads, not only will it bring disaster to the demon race, but it will also bring trouble to your domain." Only then did Yang Qing know what Lu Yi had stolen. She originally thought that this kid would at most steal some inanimate objects, but who knew that it was actually a demon? This guy really dared to think and dared to do it. After being pointed out by the reincarnation tree, Lu Yi could only accept his fate no matter how unwilling he was. He sighed, took off a spirit beast pouch from his waist and opened it. A small head immediately popped out from inside. It was Lu Yingying, who looked like it had been suffocated. It took a few deep breaths before jumping out. Then, it turned its head and put half of its body into the spirit beast pouch. After fiddling with it for a while, it pulled out Hong Dandan as well. The 2 little goblins stared at Lu Yi angrily. Their eyes green. Lu Yingying clenched her small fist and waved it at him, saying angrily, "Bad guy." Hong Dandan also echoed from the side, "Bad guy." Lu Yi rubbed his nose, speechless. The two little demons flapped their wings and flew in a circle. Then, they plunged into a passage that appeared out of thin air and disappeared without a trace. Obviously, they had been sent back to the demon spirit tree realm. The reincarnation tree's voice sounded again. As compensation for solving the problem of the demon spirit tree realm, I would like to give you a small gift. I hope you don't mind. Saying so, the void in front of Lu Yi trembled slightly, and a dark green leaf appeared out of thin air. The leaf looked no different from an ordinary leaf. It was even slightly smaller, only the size of a baby's palm. However, it was green all over, as if it was chiseled from green jade, full of vitality. Although Lu Yi didn't know what was so mysterious about this leaf, since it was a compensation from the reincarnation tree, it obviously wouldn't be an ordinary leaf. Both Android and Apple are acceptable. He turned his head and looked at Yang Qing with a look of inquiry. Yang Qing nodded imperceptibly. Only then did Lu Yi respectfully say, I dare not refuse an elder's gift. This junior thanks old tree for the gift. Holding it with both hands, the leaf immediately fell into his palm. But before Lu Yi could put it away, the leaf suddenly turned into a green light and merged into his palm. Immediately after, Lu Yi felt a slight heat on his right wrist. He lifted his sleeve to take a look and found that there was a green leaf mark on his wrist. The mark still looked so lifelike, as if a real leaf was stuck on it, but in fact it was just a mark. A moment later, the mark disappeared without a trace. Yang Qing didn't give any instructions, so it shouldn't be a bad thing. At this time, it wasn't good to ask too much, so Lu Yi could only suppress the curiosity in his heart. Old tree, this matter is over. Farewell. Yang Qing cupped his fists and said, Dragon Monarch, take care. This time, without waiting for Yang Qing to do anything, a passage appeared in front of Lu Yi. Yang Qing took the lead and stepped into it, followed by Lu Yi. In a slight daze, his vision was spinning. When Lu Yi came back to his senses, he had already appeared on the spiritual mountain in Tianzhou. In front of him was an unremarkable tree with withered leaves that seemed to have died. It was the clone of the reincarnation tree. This clone went through a reincarnation cycle every 100 years, going from exuberant vitality to lifeless. Now was its time of death. If he hadn't learned the various mysteries of this tree from Yang Qing, even if Lu Yi came here and saw this tree, he wouldn't have paid much attention to it. But it was with the help of this clone of the reincarnation tree that he was able to, in just 3 months, he had traveled from the 9 prefectures to an unknown place in the starry sky and back. The wonders of the world were truly beyond imagination. Senior, old tree's last gift. Only now did Lu Yi have the time to inquire about the mysteries of the leaf with Yang Qing. It can be considered a primer to the reincarnation tree, Yang Qing said. As Yang Qing said this, she raised her right hand and revealed her wrist. With a slight push of her power, the mark of a leaf appeared on her wrist, looking exactly the same as the one Lu Yi had obtained. He actually had such a mark as well. A primer. With this mark, you can freely go to the place where the reincarnation tree is in the future. Of course, the premise is that you are not disturbed in any way, because this thing is quite troublesome to use. It requires a very long time to accumulate power, unlike before when we borrowed the power of the reincarnation tree's clone. This may be of some help to you in the starry sky in the future. For example, if you get lost somewhere, or if you need the help of the reincarnation tree to go to a certain place, you can use this mark to reach the reincarnation tree. Lu Yi understood. If that was the case, it would be quite useful. The starry sky was vast. Although Lu Yi hadn't set foot in it for the time being, he knew that it would take a lot of time to travel in such a vast environment. However, if there was a fixed place that could be used as a transit point, it would undoubtedly save a lot of time. For the time being, this thing was useless to him. But no one could guarantee that he wouldn't need it in the future. Although it was a bit of a loss for the 2 fairies to exchange for such a mark, the former couldn't be brought out, while the latter was a gift from the reincarnation tree. The meaning was different. Yang Qing reminded him again. But you can only use this mark for yourself. You can't take others with you. You have to remember this. Lu Yi nodded. It seems that the reincarnation tree has given this mark to many people? Yang Qing said. It has indeed been given to many people. So in the future, if you use the reincarnation tree as a transit point, you may meet cultivators from other realms, because many people will use the reincarnation tree as a transit point. This is the reincarnation tree's way of survival. It reincarnates once every 10,000 years, and every time it reincarnates, it is at its weakest. Usually, cultivators from different realms use it as a transit point to save time and energy. When it needs help, there will naturally be people who will lend a helping hand. This is also the rule of survival in the cultivation world. If you want to gain something, you have to give something. Lu Yi looked pensive. But in general, if the reincarnation tree doesn't take a fancy to people, it won't casually give its mark to them. Very few cultivators in the spirit sea realm are given a mark. You can get it probably because of your good performance this time. The reincarnation tree thinks that you are a promising talent. Maybe the next time it reincarnates, it will ask for your help. You have to be mentally prepared. Lu Yi nodded silently. Since I've taken advantage of its convenience, it's only right for me to do something when the time comes. It's good that you think so. Chapter 1274. Lu Yi asked, Elder, are you planning to leave the 9 prefectures? Although Yang Qing had never mentioned this to him, Lu Yi could faintly sense that Yang Qing would not stay in the 9 prefectures for long. The current 9 prefectures was ultimately a small pond. How could it accommodate a true dragon like Yang Qing? Yang Qing chuckled. Isn't this what you guys want? Lu Yi replied. We didn't understand Elder before and misunderstood. Yes, if Elder wishes, you can continue to stay. The constellation stage experts of the 9 prefectures could not figure out Yang Qing's exact attitude towards the 9 prefectures. Hence, they could not help but be wary of him. No matter what, he had been sealed in the spirit stream battlefield for 10,000 years, and it was difficult to guarantee that he would not have any resentment. If an expert like him really wanted to vent his resentment, the current 9 prefectures would not be able to withstand it. However, after spending some time together, Lu Yi realized that Yang Qing had no ill intentions towards the 9 prefectures. Back then, Yang Qing had single-handedly resolved the disaster brought by Wuxia. Later on, Yang Qing had brought Lu Yi to the reincarnation tree to participate in the grand event of the Alpha Origin stage. From his actions, Lu Yi could more or less understand Yang Qing's attitude towards the 9 prefectures. Taking 10,000 steps back, if an expert like Yang Qing really had any ill intentions towards the 9 prefectures, who could stop him? From the perspective of Zhao, if there was a character like Yang Qing in the 9 regions, it would be a good thing that many domains could only dream of. There had already been one Wuxia before. Who knew if there would be a second, a third? When that time came, if Yang Qing was not in the 9 prefectures, who could stop him? Hence, when Lu Yi realized that Yang Qing was likely to leave soon, his mentality changed a little. He would rather have Yang Qing stay in the 9 prefectures and become its greatest protection. Yang Qing smiled. I am ultimately just a passerby to the 9 prefectures. If not for that accident back then, I would have left long ago. Although the 9 regions still exist, my old friends have all passed away. There is no reason for me to stay. What's more, I still have my own things to do. He turned to look at Lu Yi and said, You humans are a very mysterious race. Don't belittle yourself too much. Since the 9 states is your home, it is also your responsibility to protect it. Relying on others will not go far. However, you don't have to worry too much. The 9 states is now located in a relatively remote location. Unless there are some accidents, very few experts will come here. I estimate that as long as you are careful enough to not expose the existence of the 9 states, and not leave any traces outside, the 9 states will be safe for the next 1,000 years. With the growth rate of your human race, you should be able to give birth to a group of experts capable of protecting your home. Lu Yi bowed his head. He knew that once a character like Yang Qing made a decision, it would be very difficult for outsiders to change his mind. Since he had already decided to leave, there was no point in continuing to persuade him. Bowing respectfully, he said, "Many thanks to Senior for your help during this time." Yang Qing waved his hand. "We each took what we needed. I hope that one day, we can meet again somewhere in the starry sky. Perhaps at that time, I will need your help." Lu Yi happily said, "That would be Junior's greatest honor." "All right, that's all I have to say. Work hard on your cultivation." When Yang Qing finished speaking, he had already disappeared. His method of appearing and disappearing like a ghost was undoubtedly much more brilliant than Lu Ye's use of void spirit runes to teleport. Even though Lu Yi had seen it many times, he still couldn't grasp the crux of it. This wasn't just a huge gap in cultivation, but more likely a kind of mysterious use of power. However, Lu Yi could feel that Yang Qing had not left the 9 prefectures. He did not know what he was doing. It was not until half a day later that Lu Yi suddenly raised his head and vaguely sensed a trace of a figure flashing in the sky outside the 9 prefectures. He softly called out, "Little 9." A ball of light condensed not far from Lu Yi and gradually turned into the appearance of a little white rabbit. It hopped in front of Lu Yi. "Has Senior Yang left?" Lu Yi asked. Little 9 spoke in human language. "He left." Lu Yi was slightly surprised. "Why do you not seem very happy?" Little 9 sighed. "It's strange. When he was around, I always felt insecure. Now that he's gone, I feel even more depressed." Lu Yi, what do you think we should do if another Sunshine Realm cultivator like you Xian comes? Don't jinx it, don't speak nonsense." Lu Yi glared at it. Senior Yang said that the 9 prefectures are now in a relatively remote location. As long as we are careful enough, we won't have to worry about anything for the next 1,000 years. But it's better to be safe than sorry. What if something like that really happens? Yang Qing only said that. He can't guarantee anything. Lu Yi said solemnly, "So we need to strengthen ourselves. I need to work hard to cultivate and increase my cultivation. As for you, hurry up and devour the blood refining realm's foundation to increase your level. Only by strengthening oneself can you be truly strong. It's unrealistic to rely on others." Little 9 said, "I've been devouring the blood refining realm, but this kind of thing is quite time-consuming. It's not something that can be seen in a short period of time." "Then work harder," Lu Yi reprimanded. Little 9 suddenly frowned, not knowing what to do to be considered as working harder. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield mark. Lu Yi checked and found that it was from Jian Guhong. Previously, Jian Guhong and the others had asked him to find Yang Qing, to find out his attitude towards the 9 prefectures. But as a result, Lu Yi had only just arrived when Yang Qing took him to the reincarnation tree. This delay had lasted for 3 months, during which Jian Guhong and the others couldn't contact Lu Yi, and had no idea what had happened. It wasn't until now that they finally reconnected. Lu Yi sent a message back to inform Jian Guhong of his current location. After waiting for less than half a day, several streams of light flew over from afar. It was Jian Guhong and the others. Currently, there were already several hundred star constellation realm cultivators in the 9 prefectures, mainly because the 9 prefectures had just been promoted to a large realm, so there were too many 9th order divine sea realm cultivators who were advancing. Almost every day, there were people breaking through to the star constellation realm. This was a scene that every newly promoted large realm would experience. As time passed, this rate of advancement would gradually stabilize. When the time came, there would be an endless stream of divine sea realm cultivators advancing to the star constellation realm. It wouldn't be like the current round after round. Basically, all the star constellation realm cultivators were exploring the starry sky in search of spirit jades for cultivation. They didn't go too far, and were mostly scattered within a month's journey from the 9 prefectures. This way, if anything happened in the 9 prefectures, they could rush back as soon as possible to provide support. Everyone go quickly and give it a try. Of course, this also had to do with the fact that the 9 prefectures had just been connected to the starry sky. Cultivators had just begun to explore the starry sky, so they didn't dare to go too far, lest they accidentally got lost and couldn't find the way back. Most of the star constellation realm cultivators were exploring the starry sky. Only Jian Guhong and a few others stayed behind, mainly because of Yang Qing. Even if they were weak in front of Yang Qing, as a member of the most powerful group of cultivators in the 9 prefectures, they had the obligation and responsibility to stay behind and protect. When they met, Jian Guhong immediately asked, "What's the situation?" Lu Yi said, "Senior Yang has already left." Jian Guhong was stunned. "Left?" Lu Yi nodded. "He has already left the 9 prefectures and may not come back in the future." Jian Guhong and the others couldn't help but fall silent. They didn't expect that the problem that had worried them for such a long time would be solved so easily. However, because Yang Qing left so decisively, they felt that it was a pity, because in this way, they could be sure that Yang Qing really didn't have any malice towards the 9 prefectures. With such a powerhouse leaving, the 9 prefectures would have no protection. If an evil guest like Yu Xian came again, the 9 prefectures would have to rely on their own ability to resist. After all, human nature was complicated. When Yang Qing was here, the star constellation realm cultivators were on tenterhooks, fearing that he would harm the 9 prefectures. Now that he had left just like that, they couldn't help but feel that they were measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. After a long time, Jian Guhong said, "Let him leave. The 9 prefectures are the 9 prefectures of the human race. In the future, the safety of the domain will have to rely on ourselves to protect it." Lu Yi nodded. "Senior's words are reasonable, so we have to cultivate well in the future and improve our cultivation as soon as possible." Wu Chang asked curiously, "Kid, you suddenly disappeared for more than 3 months. Where did you go? We can't contact you." Lu Yi said, "Senior Yang took me to a place called the Reincarnation Tree to participate in a grand event that gathered thousands of domains." These words piqued everyone's interest. Wu Chang's eyes even widened. A grand event that gathered thousands of domains? The cultivators of the 9 regions were only in contact with the blood-refining world and the Wushuang continent. Although everyone now knew that there were many realms in the vast starry sky, it was hard to imagine what kind of scene it would be to gather thousands of realms. They didn't know what kind of magnificent scene it would be. Seeing that everyone was interested, Lu Yi briefly explained the cause and effect of the matter. After learning that the seemingly lifeless little tree in front of them was actually the clone of a Khanate supreme treasure, even the calm and collected individuals could not help but click their tongues in wonder. When they heard Lu Yi talk about the scene where thousands of domain experts gathered at the reincarnation tree, they could not help but yearn for it. When they heard about the wonders and mysteries of the various races, their hearts became increasingly itchy. Finally, when they heard that Lu Yi had defeated all the experts of the Alpha Origin stage and taken first place, they all felt proud and smiled from ear to ear. Wu Chang patted Lu Yi on the shoulder. "Good kid. It seems that the monsters of those domains are still inferior to our 9 prefectures." "Ha ha ha, well done," Jian Guhong said. "Yi, why didn't Senior Yang let you reveal that you're from the 9 prefectures and instead borrowed the name of the 9 heavens?" Lu Yi said seriously, "Because we provoked many powerful enemies in the 9 prefectures era." Although 10,000 years have passed, the hatred of those top experts in domains will not be so easily forgotten. The decline of our 9 prefectures is also because we were too ostentatious. Therefore, when we travel the starry sky in the future, we should try not to reveal that we're from the 9 prefectures to avoid being remembered. Chapter 1275. This was a problem worth paying attention to for a very long time. Jian Guhong and the others silently noted it down. When they returned, they would find an opportunity to inform the constellation realm cultivators, who had already left the 9 states. Fortunately, they hadn't gone too far, so it wasn't too troublesome to spread the news. Now that Yang Qing had left, Jian Guhong and the others were faced with another problem. "Do you think the 9 states still need constellation realm cultivators to stay behind?" Jian Guhong and the others had stayed behind because of Yang Qing. Now that Yang Qing had left, they seemed to have lost their reason to stay in the 9 states. However, there was no one to protect the 9 states, so they couldn't make up their minds. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, I think the most important thing for seniors to do now is to search for spirit jades and raise your cultivation. The constellation realm is just a starting point for the entire universe. Even if you stay behind to guard the 9 states, you won't be able to do much if a powerful enemy invades. Moreover, the 9 states is different from the Wuxia continent. Similarly, the will of the 9 prefectures was very clear and powerful. If an enemy were to invade, it would be able to send down divine punishment. With the current foundation of the 9 prefectures, even if it was the Moon Jade realm, it would still be able to resist the might of divine punishment. On the other hand, constellation realm cultivators like you will be helpless against the Moon Jade realm. You will be powerless. For the current 9 states, the heavenly punishment that little 9 could send down was undoubtedly the strongest protection. Before the 9 states cultivators' individual strength surpassed the might of the heavenly punishment of their own realm, there was no point in staying behind. Rather than wasting time in the 9 states, it was better to search for resources for cultivation. Jianlingyu took the lead. He's right. It's time for you all to set off. Constellation realm cultivators had to travel through the universe. We shouldn't interfere with the matters of the Alpha Origin realm, so there's no need for us to worry about them. Such a young man had come from the 4 states. Now that a constellation realm cultivator had appeared, the 9 states had become more useful. That should also be the correct direction for a realm to develop. The constellation realm was a dividing line. Cultivators above the constellation realm worked hard in their own realm, while cultivators below the constellation realm rushed into the universe to find a way out. First was the Nether Beast core he had obtained from the insectoid tree world. The insectoids had placed it in the tree world to establish a connection with the other tree worlds, making it easier for the insectoids to invade the other realms and abduct these rare races. Gu Hong killed a lot of people in the Spirit Sea realm. Of course, most of them didn't have their own storage space. Even if they were killed, the killer would get a lot of loot. However, Fei Chong, who was under our control, could always be treated as a spoil of war. At the latest, when I advanced to the next level, the modification of the constellation mountain saber is inevitable. Sure, one had to know that Jianlingyu and the others had been busy searching for Yangqing in the cosmos for 1 to 2 months. Even then, each of them had only managed to obtain a few hundred pieces of Yangqing. The rest had only managed to obtain a few dozen pieces. At the foot of the spiritual peak, only Shanggu Hong was left alone. Big Four's rabbit form was hopping around at the side, looking worried and worried. The sword crossing gourd didn't have any drawbacks. It wasn't that the sword chi could be recovered, so if one wanted to maintain the power of the sword crossing gourd, they had to swallow a small amount of treasures. Originally, the insectoid race's arrangement could be considered a failure. After all, in a place like the insectoid tree world, cultivators from their own realm were qualified to trespass, let alone snatch such treasures. Gu Hong looked at the mountain-like pile of Yangqing to the side. All kinds of trophies were taken out and displayed behind him in a dazzling array. I didn't choose to return to Ao Mountain. For me, there is only one task now, which is to advance to the 4th Order Divine Sea realm, then break through to the Constellation realm, and obtain the qualifications to travel the starry sky. However, those realms might not be stronger than the 4 states. It's just that we don't have anyone weak enough to obtain a clone from the reincarnation tree. So we're absent from this grand event. Jianlingyu and the others left. Meeting Du Lang in this Yangqing lode was definitely a stroke of luck. Du Lang gave me some jade-eating ants. With my own ability, it's impossible for me to obtain such a small harvest in less than a month. According to my own efficiency, it'd be a mistake to mine 1,000 pieces of Yangqing in the same amount of time. How could there not be at least 80,000 pieces? Determined or not, Gu Hong left behind a short pestle and a large amount of white sand. The other treasures were all swallowed by the sword-crossing gourd. The sword chi stored in the sword-crossing gourd was derived from swallowing a small amount of artifacts and spirit artifacts in the future. Its power was small, but this time, because the sword-crossing gourd devoured treasures of the Lu Yi level, the power of the sword chi would definitely increase slightly. If a realm wants to weaken, it has to rely on the cultivator. The weaker the individual cultivator, the weaker the realm. In the starry sky, there are many inferior realms. What I've seen and heard are probably just icebergs. In a corner, there are even fewer realms that don't even have the qualifications to participate in the divine sea battle. Moreover, they were all the most outstanding realms of their respective realms. The quality of the Lu Yi they used was naturally of the highest quality. Gu Hong didn't slow down his cultivation. Instead, he finished counting his gains from the reincarnation tree. However, Fei Chang did such a thing. He uprooted the insect nest in the insect race's tree realm, and didn't let go of the void beast's core. The divine sea battle of the divine sea realm has opened my eyes. It has also allowed me to understand the strength of the alpha origin realm better than any other cultivator in the 4 states. This item can break through 2 tree realms of the same type. The reason it relies on is the effect of the spirit inscriptions contained in it. Those 2 items were mainly used to reforge the Pan Mountain Saber. In the battle with Baishur, the Pan Mountain Saber has lost a few small and large gaps. Moreover, as Gu Hong's cultivation base has increased, the Pan Mountain Saber can no longer meet my needs. With the increase of my own strength and the future development of the realm, Gu Hong suddenly realized that the path of cultivation is long and heavy. When I was only at the Spirit Stream realm and Cloud River realm, I was only thinking about when I could reach the Divine Sea realm. I couldn't do as I please. Now, I know that the Divine Sea realm is another starting point on the long path of cultivation. Not to mention Fei Chang's level. Even if it's a treasure of a lower level, the sword gourd shouldn't be able to devour it. Moreover, the sword qi derived from it would be even weaker. This Xuandu World's Dingyu said that after 10,000 years, no one has ever appeared with a sword gourd. Its power is enough to destroy stars and extinguish the sun. It's extremely terrifying. Gu Hong can use those Lu Yi items. As a weapon cultivator, it's enough for me to not have the Pan Mountain Saber. I naturally need to rely on other treasures. If it's a small realm that hasn't produced a constellation realm cultivator, then it's basically impossible to find Yang Qing in the space around the Alpha Origin realm. This is because once they're born, they'll be collected by others and won't remain for long. That battle with the Divine Sea realm made Gu Hong realize a problem. As my cultivation base increases, the sword cultivator clone will be able to play a greater and greater role. At the very least, 80,000 pieces of Yang Qing can guarantee Gu Hong's cultivation needs for a short period of time before he reaches the constellation realm. In other words, it's enough to completely stabilize my constellation realm cultivation base, but that won't do me any practical harm. Behind Gu Hong, there are dozens of Lu Yi and other treasures of various shapes and sizes. There are also some unopened storage bags. Even if the things outside have little value, they should accumulate to a considerable amount. This short pestle is a Lu Yi from the insect race. It's heavy and sturdy. The white sand is a treasure from a body cultivator. It's also light, and doesn't have the effect of being attached. Comparatively speaking, the value of spirit crystals is much less than that of Yang Qing. The energy contained within is also much more abundant. The relationship between the two is like comparing high-grade spirit stones and supreme-grade spirit stones. I didn't count the Fei Changs in detail, but there should be less than 80,000 pieces. It's also the harvest from the Fei Chang mine with Du Lang. There are a few spirit crystals mixed in, but it's not much, only about 100 pieces. Gu Hong has a vague feeling that this thing can't be used to escape. For example, when I'm trapped in a sealed space, I shouldn't be able to borrow the mysterious power of this thing to open the connection between the sealed space and the inner world. So what if I cultivate to the Sunshine Realm? Yuxian was weak enough, but he was still killed by the spirit treasure. That cold feeling didn't hinder Fei Chang's cultivation. Instead, it made me even more motivated. Cultivation is like climbing a mountain. The process of climbing one peak after another is the most enjoyable and worth looking forward to. Gu Hong found out about the origin of the sword gourd in the future. He only felt that the treasure was very mysterious. He also didn't know that it was very mysterious. It could actually produce sword qi by devouring other treasures. Now that I know that the sword gourd is a Xiantian treasure, I can't accept it no matter how mysterious it is. That's just an idea. As for how to activate the power of this item, I'll have to try it out. No matter what, it's always wrong to keep it for now. I can only say that I can use it at any time. I can't give it to the sword gourd to devour. The reason is that the sword cultivator clone's strength relies too much on the sword chi in the sword gourd. The sword chi in the sword gourd is powerful enough, so the sword cultivator clone's performance is naturally subpar. That's the space around the 4 prefectures. If there are people exploring it, Yangqing's production will be high. Therefore, it's the same to stay outside and cultivate. On the contrary, it's quieter outside. Also, there are no battlefield imprints. If other people want to contact me, they can send me a message at any time. The heart core contains extremely mysterious patterns. It doesn't seem to have any traces of void spirit runes. Gu Hong only hurriedly checked it, and didn't look too carelessly. Now, it seems that the patterns don't have any obvious traces of void spirit runes. Fei Chong was the most substantial gain. Other than that, there were also various other things. These were the spoils of war that they had seized. Can the sword gourd destroy stars and extinguish the sun? Gu Hong is a lake. But if the sword gourd really devours a treasure of sufficient quality, then it might not be possible. To these weaklings who have been wandering the universe for a long time, 80,000 pieces of Yangqing might be considered little. But to Gu Hong, it's a huge fortune. Chapter 1276. Because of the soul-severing saber's ability to create seals, Lu Yi didn't have high requirements for the mountain pan saber. All he had to do was strengthen the quality and weight of the saber. This was a task that any master refiner could accomplish. It wasn't too difficult. Lu Yi even wanted to modify the saber himself. He had some attainments in the art of blacksmithing. After all, he had practiced blacksmithing with Master Kong Kong for several months in the sword tool sect's secret realm. He wasn't completely ignorant. However, he wasn't in a hurry. There was still some time before he could ascend to the constellation realm. After checking his other gains, the biggest one was the treasure gourd. It was the sword gourd's brother. The 2 gourds were placed together. From the outside, they looked about the same, but the color of the skin was slightly different. The sword gourd was green in color, and could be considered a green gourd. The skin of the second gourd was slightly red. The reincarnation tree's alpha origin realm opened once every 100 years. Spirit Sea realm geniuses from different realms could compete inside. However, the Vine of Fortune didn't appear every time. Only when the treasure gourd matured would the Vine of Fortune appear in front of the world. Since ancient times, the Alpha Origin realm had fought for the Spirit Sea realm countless times, but the Vine of Fortune had only appeared a few times. More than 10,000 years ago, someone from the 9 provinces sword tool sect obtained the sword gourd. Even longer ago, someone obtained a wind gourd. It was said that the wind gourd could blow out dark flames and gales. Any cultivator who touched it would die. It was now a top-tier realm's treasure. Perhaps there were other treasure gourds with similar effects hidden away. However, because it was too long ago, and they were kept in secret, no one knew about them. I was curious as to whether the treasure gourd Lingdan obtained had any miraculous effects. However, the environment in the Alpha Origin realm was right, so I didn't investigate. Now I finally had the chance. The mouth of the gourd flashed, and Lu Yi was sucked into it. Then the 8th group, the 7th group. Seeing that I was busy, Big Four skipped over and stared at the gourd in my hand. Lingdan, what's that gourd for? It seems very powerful. Just look at the sword gourd and you would know. When I obtained the sword gourd, I was only in the true lake stage, but I was still able to activate the power of the sword gourd. Because of these patterns, each leaf emitted a powerful light, looking dazzling. For a moment he didn't have a small head. Could it be that he was wrong? What did the gourd need to devour in order to produce its power? That was a headache for him. It seemed like he couldn't give it a try. Lingdan's eyes were sharp, and his hands were slow. He grabbed the dense light with his hand, but before he had time to examine it, another powerful light flashed from the mouth of the gourd, and the 7th cloud of dense light gushed out. Soon after, I took out another Luyi to try. I discovered that there were no exceptions. No matter what kind of Tianan it was, the treasured gourd would still swallow it. Then the entire gourd was like a Paishio, only retreating. He infused his spiritual power into the gourd, but there was no reaction. Artifacts were fine, spirit stones and spirit jades were fine, and spirit pills were fine. He casually picked up a bottle of healing pills, poured out a Tianan pill, and placed it near the mouth of the gourd. Ling Dan's brows furrowed as he thought about the possibilities. Ling Dan suddenly noticed that the gourd in his hand was shaking. I quickly grasped it, and used my divine sense to sense it. The first time was too sudden, so Ling Dan didn't have time to react. Thus, I took out another healing pill. This time, I was very fast. As I placed the healing pill near the mouth of the gourd, Ling Dan also paid close attention to the changes in the gourd. Ling Dan suppressed his emotions and continued to try. Holding the gourd in his hand, he silently used his spiritual power to sense it. He could clearly feel that the gourd contained many mysterious patterns. Even with Ling Dan's current attainments in the Tao of Spirit runes, he couldn't figure out the specific effects of these patterns. After 4 balls of light, the gourd returned to normal. What was that thing? Ling Dan wasn't angry at all. Yes, but its appearance was very good. It also exuded a light fragrance that made one feel refreshed. Even the annoyance from before had disappeared. This matter was very difficult to deal with, because there was no precedent to follow. Everything had to be done by himself. If he could always spend a lot of effort to steal a gourd from under the noses of hundreds of cultivators, wouldn't it just be a decoration? This was too much of a loss. I casually grabbed a medicinal ingredient that still had some mud on it, and quickly placed it near the mouth of the gourd. Ling Dan was startled for a moment before he became happy. He turned his head to look at Big Four. He knew that the treasured gourd could swallow Big Four, but that was something he could try. If it really swallowed him, then the problem would be small. From his experience, the treasured gourd seemed to only swallow Tianan, and other things wouldn't cause it to react in any way. As if he could read my mind, Big Four hurriedly took a few steps forward. His body flickered, and he turned into light and disappeared. Ling Dan carefully observed the gourd, and saw a powerful light flash from the mouth of the gourd. Then, a ball of light shot out from the mouth of the gourd. He picked up the gourd and squinted his eyes to look at it. He found traces of the healing pills that had been swallowed and shook them. There was no sound at all. The interior of the gourd seemed to be an empty space. The Lu leaves had disappeared after being swallowed. I could faintly feel that there were some mysterious changes happening inside the gourd, but I couldn't tell what kind of changes were happening. Ling Dan only knew that all kinds of mysterious runes were appearing and disappearing inside the gourd. It was so slow that I didn't have time to check it out. I took another one to test it out, but it was the same. Even if I knew the effects of the Lu leaves, Ling Dan could tell that the 4 Tianan pills were of the highest quality. As for whether or not they had any effects, that was up to me. I had to personally test it out. Tianan was just casually testing it out, and didn't have any expectations. However, a miraculous scene occurred. The healing pill that he placed at the mouth of the gourd caused a reaction. Ling Dan had never seen the appearance of a Lu leaf before. If the Lu leaves I came into contact with in the future were mud balls, then these 4 weren't pearls. I had gathered many rare and precious medicinal ingredients during my trip to the Alpha Origin realm, and they were all rare and precious ingredients from the inner realms. I had originally planned to bring them back for 7th Senior Sister and Huasi to refine into pills. To medical cultivators, these ingredients were extremely precious. Now they were all placed in front of me in a dazzling little pile. I was well versed in medicine, and those medicinal ingredients didn't have any special characteristics. Naturally, I knew what they could be used for. The result was just as I thought. The gourd's mouth flashed, and the herb was swallowed without a trace. It was a feeling, but Ling Dan firmly believed that feeling was wrong. But if that was the case, how could I test its effects? The sword gourd wasn't like this. It first swallowed treasures and gave birth to sword chi. Only then could it use the sword chi to kill enemies. Ling Dan was flustered. This situation lasted for a full incense stick of time, before the trembling gourd suddenly stopped. The result was the same as before. The gourd's mouth flashed, and the healing pill was swallowed. Tianan didn't think much of it. The gourd couldn't swallow any kind of lu leaf, nor could it swallow any kind of medicinal herb. As such, he couldn't be sure that its effects were not related to medicinal herbs. However, he still needed to test it out. With that in mind, Ling Dan took out a trash magic tool and placed it near the gourd's mouth. Unexpectedly, there was no reaction. Now that the gourd had a reaction, was it because it had swallowed too little? Ling Dan was confused again. From the looks of it, the gourd's effects shouldn't be related to the lu leaf. At the very least, it could swallow the lu leaf. However, before swallowing the lu leaf, there was nothing else. Ling Dan tried to pour his spiritual power into the gourd to see if he could stimulate the gourd's power. However, his spiritual power was like a stone sinking into a small sea. There was no feedback. Ling Dan grumbled, "You know how powerful it is. In any case, it's quite infuriating." Ling Dan flipped the gourd upside down and shook it, but nothing fell out. Before the healing pill was swallowed, it was like a stone sinking into a small sea. It didn't even cause a ripple. What the hell? Since there was no sword gourd in his eyes, his gourd should have a way of swallowing treasures. At this moment, Tianan also knew what the mist from the gourd was. At first, Ling Dan thought that he had enough power. After all, the gourd was a natural treasure, so it was very difficult for him to activate it. The gourd should learn to swallow the lu leaf. But what about the medicinal herb? Ling Dan thought of the sword gourd's characteristics and guessed that this treasure was the same as the sword gourd. What did it need to swallow first? It was fine as long as there was no reaction. He was just afraid that it would react. Although I don't know much about natural supreme treasures like the vines of fortune, I do know one thing. These gourds that didn't come from the vines of fortune should all have the same effect. There should be 2 gourds with the same effect. Tianan spent more than half a day and used up all of his spiritual power. After half a day, the gourd still didn't have any reaction. I was sure that the treasure's power was activated in this way. Otherwise, even if my cultivation was high enough, there wouldn't be any reaction. After making up his mind, Ling Dan took out the lu leaf and let the gourd swallow it. Then he took out a medicinal herb for the gourd to swallow. In any case, he had a small handful of medicinal herbs with Tianan, so there would be a problem if he didn't try. However, he was a bit discouraged. He took out a spirit stone to try, but there was still no effect. He took out a spirit jade, but the result was the same. Since it was activated in this way, how could it be activated? It wasn't until the gourd swallowed a dozen medicinal herbs that something strange happened. These were surprisingly lu leaves. However, they weren't the same as Tianan's. The surface of each lu leaf was covered in patterns. They looked very mysterious and simple, as if they were naturally born. However, they also hid a profound truth. Chapter 1277. Louis had no qualms about swallowing spirit pills. Not to mention the spirit pills that came out of the gourd. Even if they were poison pills, he wouldn't care. With his talent tree burning, there was likely no poison in the world that could affect him. He casually took a spirit pill and threw it directly into his mouth. He gently chewed and a sound came from his mouth, as if something had broken, followed by a sweet taste rolling down his throat to his abdomen. It didn't feel like he was swallowing a spirit pill, but a berry full of sweet juice. The soft sound was the sound of the berry's skin breaking. This was the first time Lu Yi had experienced something like this. Since he started cultivating, he had swallowed a lot of spirit pills, especially spirit pills that could increase his cultivation. He only had one feeling, and that was that no spirit pill had a good taste. However, this spirit pill from the gourd gave him a different feeling. He was secretly surprised. As expected of a spirit pill from the gourd, the taste was different. He calmed his mind and experienced the effects of this spirit pill. A moment later, Lu Yi figured out the use of this spirit pill. This was a healing pill. However, he couldn't clearly distinguish whether the first batch of 4 Lu Yi was the same as the last 4. Only the size of the Lu Yi was the same. The most obvious difference was that the color was the same. In other words, even if it were other precious herbs, the Lu Yi produced by the gourd would have no impurities. This was the ability of the gourd itself. After silently feeling it for a moment, the spirit pill raised his eyebrows. The spirit pill calmed his mind. He hadn't had 2 successful experiences in the past. Although there seemed to be a general pattern in those 2 experiences. As long as he didn't try too much, he would be able to find the hidden rules. Before the same Lu Yi was swallowed, it shouldn't be strange for it to produce the same Su Yi. If he wanted to find a pattern in that kind of order, it would be very difficult. But since there was no precedent of success, as long as he didn't try too much, he wouldn't be able to find anything. The Su Yi after that was a healing pill. So what was the last one? After a while, the gourd trembled slightly again. Why would the treasured gourd give birth to 2 of the same Lu Yi in the same process? Could it be that it had nothing to do with the raw materials? The process of exploration was bumpy, but once he found the method, all the problems could be solved. What was the situation then? Therefore, if there were not enough Lu Yi, no matter who it was, their cultivation speed would increase by leaps and bounds. That would definitely cause a small impact and subversion to the existing cultivation methods in the cultivation world. In a short period of time, Ling Dan felt as if his entire body had become much heavier and slower, and there seemed to be even more vitality in his flesh and blood. Su Yi casually sized up the 4 newly produced continental leaves, and found that they were the same as the previous 4. They were all dense and dazzling, and the surface of the continental leaves was covered with patterns, looking extremely mysterious. The lower the quality of the Lu Yi, the greater the reaction of the talent tree. It was not that the gray mist was thinner. The key question now was whether Su Yi could figure out how those Lu Yi were born. You were wondering why you couldn't concentrate recently. It turns out that there was a saying about not having a brain fog before the coronation. Very few people don't have similar side effects. For authors like you, that side effect isn't satisfying at all. Moreover, Ling Dan found a pattern. Once the gourd finished spitting out the Lu Yi, there would be more than 4. One was a small number, and one was a large number. This meant that the improvement that the Lu Yi could bring to a cultivator at my level was extremely significant. The efficiency of using the Lu Yi would be even slower than using stealing heaven's secrets. I recalled all my actions afterward, whether I let the gourd swallow the Lu Yi, or the herbs I collected from the Alpha origin. There seemed to be some pattern to it. But I definitely didn't have enough Lu Yi, so the efficiency of swallowing the Lu Yi would inevitably become the main method of cultivation. Although I had only experienced it twice, it was a hidden pattern of the gourd. Over the next few days, Ling Dan fought a battle of wits and courage with the gourd. During this time, I even sent a message to 7th senior sister to ask her about some things related to medicine. The visible furnace in his abdomen was still working. That was why it was known that the medicinal effects of a single leaf could only last for a short period of time before it was completely exhausted. What was commendable was that although the medicinal effects it contained were extremely small, it would be released very quickly in a cultivator's body. It would erupt all at once, giving the cultivator not enough time to absorb and refine it, causing the medicinal effects to be wasted. Moreover, the most worrisome thing was that refining required any interference, and the gourd couldn't complete the entire refining process by itself. The production of the healing pill would inevitably follow after it was swallowed by the gourd. It didn't matter if there were a dozen or so herbs. These herbs were all extremely precious and rare items harvested from the Alpha origin stage. The healing pills produced from such herbs before they were swallowed by the gourd would definitely be of extremely low quality, and would naturally have extremely ordinary medicinal effects. As for whether there were any impurities, it should have something to do with the herbs. It should be the gourd's own ability. With a trace of curiosity, Ling Dan took out a Lu Yi and stuffed it into his mouth. Just like before, he chewed heavily. The Lu Yi was whole, and a sweet fragrance flowed down his throat to his abdomen. I finally know what the medicinal effect of the Su Yi was. It was the Lu Yi that could increase a cultivator's cultivation, but it wasn't used for cultivation. Moreover, the medicinal effect was amazing and long-lasting. With such thoughts in mind, Ling Dan had the gourd swallow the Lu Yi and various other herbs. Ling Dan decided to call it a pill gourd. That was something that had never happened before. Every sui had no impurities. When the Lu Yi entered the stomach, the useless things would be absorbed and refined by the body, displaying the medicinal effect it shouldn't have. The impurities would be burned clean by the talent tree, turning into gray mist and dissipating. Moreover, Ling Dan knew what these herbs were and randomly chose them. Sure enough, a moment ago, a faint light flashed from the mouth of the gourd, and a dense light was spat out. It was only in front of 4 balls of light that the gourd calmed down again. However, when he swallowed the healing pill, the effects of the medicine kicked in, and the accumulated internal injuries were quickly healed. The effect of that healing pill could almost be described with words, but its effect on the injuries hadn't even reached its peak. What kind of matter was that? It had to be known that no matter how low a pill refiner's skills were, the Lu Yi they refined might have the slightest bit of impurities. That wasn't something that could be done by human means. Sui knew that the gourd was about to spit out the Lu Yi again. He immediately held his breath and concentrated, sensing the changes inside the gourd while waiting. But that time, there wasn't the slightest bit of gray mist under the talent tree. That meant that the healing pill that came out of the gourd didn't have the slightest bit of impurities that weren't harmful to him. Because after the medicinal effect was dissolved, some of the accumulated internal injuries in his body showed signs of being greatly relieved, and a comfortable feeling spread throughout his body. Ling Dan didn't take it too seriously, because those minor impurities didn't have any practical effect on his strength. It could even be said that he could feel it on a daily basis. He didn't prepare the superior Ling Dan and nervously put it away. Then came the 7th, the 8th. It wasn't something that could be used to refine pills, but by borrowing its power, even if one didn't know anything about medicine, as long as they grasped the rules, they could still refine extremely low-quality Lu Yi without any impurities. Before those injuries healed, they didn't have any impurities. A long time ago, Wuxia told me that if I didn't have the chance, I had to find a medical practitioner to treat my injuries frequently. Only then would I be able to get rid of the impurities in my body. What was even more frightening was that the Lu Yi didn't have the slightest bit of impurities, and no one could refine and absorb it daily. But that Lu Yi continued to show its effects for more than 10 breaths. After 10 breaths of time, his stomach was still warm, as if there was a large furnace missing from his stomach. The most important thing was that the spirit pill could sense that as the medicinal efficacy spread, his foundation was rapidly growing. And that kind of healing pill, before I swallowed one, I didn't even have 4 of them. If that thing was used at a critical point, it could save my life, or even save my life. But no matter how bad its quality was, it still had no impurities, which was reflected under the talent tree, and not the gray mist produced before it was burned. There was definitely no process involved. If I could figure out the process, Ling Dan felt that I would be able to replicate the effects of the lake treasure gourd. Sui had collected a lot of herbs from the alpha origin stage, but there were very few types of herbs. The herbs thrown into the gourd were naturally the same as the ones thrown into the lake treasure gourd. In terms of abnormalities, the process of swallowing Lu Yi was like this. A Lu Yi entered my stomach, refined, and absorbed, and turned into my foundation. The entire process lasted for more than 10 breaths, because each Lu Yi's every effect was limitless. There was no limit to how much improvement each leaf could bring to the body, so the feeling was very obvious. It had to be accumulated to a certain extent before Han, who could sense it. Up until now, the quality of the Lu Yi pills I had consumed were all of inferior quality. This was because I had been lacking in merits and battle merits since a long time ago. Su Yi's things couldn't be bought casually from the Tianji treasury, so it was only natural for me to pick up the inferior ones. As a weapon cultivator, he often had to engage in close combat with the enemy. Injuries in battle were unavoidable. Lu Yi had been cultivating for so long, and he had suffered many injuries. There was a period of time when his body was covered in wounds after he took off his clothes. It was a shocking sight. Ling Dan also realized that the lake treasure gourd he had obtained in the alpha origin stage didn't have such a miraculous ability. It was like the sword gourd, which could devour treasures to derive sword chi and kill enemies. It was also like the legendary wind gourd, which contained underworld flames and astral winds, but its power was limited. For Lingdan, stealing heaven's secrets was the slowest cultivation method, because the talent tree couldn't devour pure spirit chi as much as it wanted and turn it into its foundation. Swallowing Lu Yi and spirit stones was only a supplementary method. What surprised Su Yi even more was that the talent tree didn't react at all before he swallowed the healing pill. After persistent efforts and fumbling, Lingdan finally found the correct way to use the lake treasure gourd and knew what kind of effects it could display. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.